They say a king without mercy is a monster. But what do you call a man who survives poison meant to kill him, watches his family butchered at a peace table, and still crawls back to claim a throne nobody wanted him to have? You call him King Draven Kaelor, the scarred alpha. The wolf who learned that survival doesn't ask for permission. It takes everything and apologizes to no one. This is the story of a broken man who became a king and the unwanted girl who walked into his frozen hell carrying secrets that could destroy them both. Stick around till the end because this gets bloody, beautiful, and absolutely unforgivable. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. The carriage wheels carved through frozen mud like claws dragging across bone. Seraphina Vale pressed her forehead against the ice-cold window and watched the southern territories disappear behind mountains that looked like broken teeth. Everything green and alive died somewhere around the third day of travel. Now there was only white. White snow. White sky. White death waiting at the end of this miserable road north. She was 19 years old and being delivered to a man everyone called a monster. Her fingers trembled against the silk of her traveling cloak. The fabric cost more than most families earned in a year, but it meant nothing. Lady Morell made sure of that. Beautiful prison. Expensive noose. The same performance Seraphina had endured her entire life. Dress the unwanted stepdaughter in luxury, so nobody asks why she never smiles. The decree sat folded in her lap like a death sentence written in royal ink. King Draven Kaelor demands a bride from House Valkyrin. Send the girl bearing your bloodline. Failure to comply will be considered treason against the Empire. Celestine was supposed to go. Golden-haired Celestine with her perfect laugh and her ability to make men stupid just by existing. Alpha Lucian Vale's real daughter. The one everyone loved. But Lady Morell looked at Seraphina the night of her 19th birthday and smiled that cold smile that never reached her eyes. You will go instead. No explanation, no negotiation. Just a carriage at dawn and guards who wouldn't meet her gaze because they knew exactly what this was. Sacrifice. Seraphina closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's face. The memories were fragments now. Warmth. Laughter. The smell of jasmine in summer. Then sickness. Then silence. Then Lucian remarried within 6 months, and Seraphina became the ghost-haunting House Valkyrin's perfect new family. Invisible until she became useful. The carriage lurched over broken terrain and her stomach twisted. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Fear lived in her throat now, thick and choking. The wolves escorting her barely spoke. 4 of them. Hard men with scars and dead eyes. They weren't there to protect her. They were there to make sure she arrived. One of them finally broke the silence as they entered a mountain pass so narrow the carriage wheels screamed against stone. His name was Garen, older wolf, missing half his left ear. You ever been north before, girl? Seraphina opened her eyes. No. Garen grunted. Shows. You're shaking like a rabbit. She wanted to snap back. Wanted to tell him that being terrified didn't make her weak. But her voice died somewhere between her chest and her mouth. Because what was the point? These men didn't care if she was afraid. They were being paid to deliver cargo. Another wolf laughed. Mean sound. Let her shake. King will break her soon enough anyway. The one driving the carriage, a younger wolf with a broken nose, glanced back through the small window separating them. Shut your mouth, Rian. Girl's already dead. No need to bury her twice. Seraphina's blood went cold. Dead? Nobody answered. The carriage kept moving. Snow began falling again, thick and suffocating. She watched it pile against the window until the world outside disappeared completely, and all that remained was white silence and the rattling wheels dragging her toward a fate she couldn't escape. They said King Draven walked with a crippled leg. They said wolfsbane poison destroyed his family during a peace summit 7 years ago, murdered his parents, killed his younger brother, left Draven barely alive and permanently damaged. They said he drowned traitors beneath frozen lakes and made examples of anyone who questioned his authority. They said he never smiled. They said he ruled Nocturne like a man who had nothing left to lose because he didn't. Seraphina didn't know what terrified her more. The idea of marrying a monster, or the realization that monsters were made, not born. And the world had spent 7 years making Draven Kaelor into something unspeakable, She thought about that while the carriage rolled north through terrain that wanted everything dead. Thought about how easy it was to call someone a monster when you didn't have to survive what they survived. When you didn't watch your family bleed out on marble floors while poison ate your leg from the inside and left you crippled and alone and expected to rule an empire that smelled your weakness like blood in water. The strong don't become cruel because they enjoy it. They become cruel because the world teaches them that mercy is suicide, that kindness gets you killed, that the only way to keep breathing is to make sure everyone else is too afraid to stop you. Draven Kaelor wasn't born a monster. He was forged into one by people who thought dead kings were easier to control than living ones. And now Seraphina was being sent to marry the man those same people tried to murder. The irony tasted like ash. The carriage stopped 3 days later. Seraphina woke to silence. No wheels, no wind, just cold so brutal it burned her lungs when she breathed. Garen opened the door and stepped aside. "Welcome to Nightfang Crown." She climbed out slowly, legs numb from days of sitting, and looked up. The fortress rose from black cliffs like something carved by violence itself. No warmth, no color. Just obsidian stone and iron gates and towers that disappeared into storm clouds overhead. The ocean crashed somewhere far below, invisible but furious. The sound reminded her of wolves snarling. This wasn't a palace. This was a monument to survival. Guards lined the entrance, dozens of them. Armored wolves watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright contempt. Nobody helped her with her belongings. Nobody spoke. They just stared. Seraphina forced herself to stand straight despite the fear clawing at her ribs. She'd survived 19 years of being invisible. She could survive this. A woman emerged from the fortress entrance, tall, severe, gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She stopped 3 feet away and studied Seraphina like something bought at market. "I am Warden Thessaly. You will follow me. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not wander. You will not embarrass this court with southern softness. Do you understand?" Seraphina nodded. Warden Thessaly's eyes narrowed. "Use your words. I understand." "Good." The warden turned and walked back toward the entrance. Seraphina followed, boots crunching against frozen gravel. The guards watched her pass. One of them muttered something that sounded like another lamb for slaughter, but she kept moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant breaking. The inside of Nightfang Crown felt colder than the outside. Black marble floors, stone arches, wolf banners hanging like warnings from vaulted ceilings. Everything sharp, everything designed to remind you that comfort was a privilege earned through blood. Servants moved through the corridors like ghosts. They didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her, just kept their heads down and worked. Seraphina's heart hammered. Warden Thessaly led her through a maze of hallways until they reached a chamber on the eastern wing. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and gestured inside. "Your quarters. A servant will bring you appropriate clothing. The king will summon you when he's ready. Until then, you do not leave this room." Seraphina stepped inside. The chamber was massive, cold. A bed large enough for 3 people sat against the far wall beneath a window overlooking the cliffs. Fireplace unlit. Tapestries depicting wolves tearing apart stags. She turned back toward Warden Thessaly. "When will I meet him?" The warden's expression remained carved from ice. "When he decides you're worth his time." The door slammed shut. The lock turned. Seraphina stood alone in the center of the room and finally let herself shake. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she'd abandoned years ago. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling and her breathing came too fast and the walls felt like they were closing in. This was real. She was trapped inside a frozen fortress ruled by a king everyone feared, wearing a dead girl's identity, carrying secrets that would get her killed if anyone discovered the truth. Because Seraphina Vale wasn't noble blood. She was a lie wrapped in silk. Her mother had been a servant in House Valkaren, beautiful, kind, naive enough to believe that Alpha Lucian loved her. He didn't. He used her, got her pregnant, then married her quietly to avoid scandal and kept her hidden like a shameful secret until she died, and he could pretend the whole thing never happened. Seraphina inherited her mother's face and her father's name and absolutely nothing else. No wolf blood, no pack connection, no power. Just a bastard daughter dressed up as nobility because it was easier than admitting the truth. Lady Morel knew. Of course she knew. That's why Celestine stayed south while Seraphina got shipped north to marry a crippled king. Nobody expected to survive the year. Expendable. Replaceable. Forgettable. Seraphina moved to the window and looked out at the storm-gray ocean below. Waves crashed against jagged rocks with enough force to shatter bone. The wind screamed. Snow fell sideways. Somewhere in this fortress, King Draven Kaelor was deciding her fate. And Seraphina had no idea if she'd lived long enough to regret being sent here. The servant arrived an hour later. A girl, maybe 16. Thin, nervous. She carried a bundle of dark clothing and wouldn't make eye contact. Warden Thessaly sent these. You're to wear them tonight. The king is holding court. Seraphina took the clothes. They were heavier than anything she'd worn before. Wool, fur-lined, built for a climate that wanted you dead. Thank you. The girl nodded and turned to leave. Wait. The servant froze. Seraphina stepped closer. What's your name? The girl's eyes went wide like the question itself was dangerous. I'm not supposed to talk to you. I won't tell anyone. I just want to know your name. Silence. Then quietly, Mira. Seraphina smiled. It felt foreign on her face. I'm Seraphina. Mira stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Then she bolted from the room without another word. The door locked again. Seraphina looked down at the clothes in her hands and felt the weight of this place settle deeper into her bones. Even kindness was suspicious here. She dressed slowly. The garments fit better than expected. Someone had taken measurements, planned this. She stared at herself in the polished steel mirror mounted on the wall and barely recognized the girl staring back. Dark gray wool dress, black cloak, hair pulled back, no jewelry, no softness. She looked like she belonged to Nightfang Crown now. The thought made her sick. Guards came for her as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. 2 of them. Silent. They escorted her through corridors lit by torches that cast shadows long enough to drown in. Other nobles passed them in the hallways. Men in dark furs, women in severe gowns. Everyone watched her. Nobody spoke. They reached a massive set of double doors carved with wolves mid-hunt. The guards pushed them open. The throne room stretched before her like a cathedral built for violence. Obsidian floors polished to black glass. Columns rising toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Banners bearing the royal crest, a wolf's skull crowned in iron. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais of stone, sat the throne itself, and in it sat the king. Seraphina's breath caught. King Draven Kaelor looked exactly like the rumors promised, and nothing like she expected. He was massive, broad shoulders that looked like they were carved from the same stone as his fortress, arms built from years of swinging steel and surviving battles that should have killed him. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, despite him only being 32. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down across his cheek to his jaw, jagged and brutal, like someone had tried to carve his face off and failed. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Storm gray, cold as the ocean outside. Intelligent in a way that made her skin crawl because she knew immediately that this man saw everything, noticed everything, forgot nothing. The eyes of a man who had survived everything the world threw at him and learned to throw it back harder. He sat perfectly still, one hand resting on the arm of the throne, the other holding a goblet of wine. His posture radiated control, authority, the kind of presence that didn't need to shout because everyone already knew what happened to people who made him raise his voice. Around him stood his council, hard-faced men in military dress, a few women who looked sharp enough to cut, everyone watching her approach with varying degrees of suspicion and disdain. The guard stopped her 10 feet from the dais. Seraphina's knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them and forced herself to stand straight. King Draven studied her in silence. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The entire hall waited. She felt their eyes on her, felt their judgment, felt the weight of every lie she'd ever told pressing down on her shoulders until she thought she might collapse under it. Then he spoke. His voice was low, rough, the sound of gravel scraping steel. You're smaller than I expected. Seraphina swallowed hard. I'm stronger than I look. One of the councilmen laughed, mocking sound. A woman beside him smiled like watching prey squirm was entertainment. Draven's expression didn't change. He set down the goblet and leaned forward slightly. House Valkyrin sent you in place of Seraphina Vale. Why? The question landed like a blade between her ribs. Seraphina's mind raced. She couldn't tell the truth. Couldn't admit that Celestine was too valuable to waste on a crippled king nobody expected to hold his throne much longer. Couldn't say that she was the expendable one, the replacement, the girl nobody would miss. So she lied. Celestine is needed in the south. I volunteered to come in her place. Silence. Draven's eyes narrowed. You volunteered? Yes. To marry a man you've never met. To live in a kingdom you've never seen. To leave behind everything you know. Seraphina's throat tightened. Yes. He stood. The movement was slow, deliberate, and she saw it immediately, the limp. His left leg didn't move the same as his right. The damage was there, hidden beneath control and years of compensation. But it was real. Wolfsbane poison didn't just kill his family. It crippled him permanently, left him with nerve damage that meant every step hurt. Every day was pain. Every moment a reminder that he survived something that should have ended him. And yet he still stood, still ruled, still commanded an empire despite the weakness everyone could see. That took a kind of strength Seraphina couldn't even imagine. King Draven descended the dais steps one at a time and crossed the distance between them. He stopped close enough that she could smell leather and smoke and something darker. Blood, maybe. Or just the cold. He towered over her. And when he spoke again, his voice dropped to something almost gentle. Almost. You're lying. Seraphina's blood turned to ice. His hand moved. Not fast, not threatening. He reached up and tilted her chin so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. I don't know why you are lying. I don't know what House Valkyrin is hiding. But I know fear when I see it. And you, girl, are terrified. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Draven leaned closer. Close enough that she felt his breath against her skin. So here's what's going to happen. You will stay. You will play the role of noble bride. You will sit beside me at feasts and smile when spoken to and pretend this is exactly where you want to be. And in return, I will let you keep your secrets. He released her chin. For now. Then he turned and walked back to the throne like the conversation was already forgotten. Seraphina stood frozen. One of the councilmen, a wolf with silver hair and a cruel mouth, stepped forward. Your Majesty, surely we should investigate. Draven cut him off with a look that could split stone. Lord Maelor, if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. Lord Maelor's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Of course, my king. Draven sat back down and gestured dismissively toward Seraphina. Take her to the guest wing. Make sure she's comfortable. She's going to be here a long time. The guards moved immediately. Seraphina didn't resist, didn't speak. She let them escort her out of the throne room while her mind screamed. He knew. King Draven knew she was lying, and he didn't care. That terrified her more than anything else. Because a man who lets you keep your lies is a man who plans to use them against you later. And Seraphina had just walked into a trap she didn't even know existed. The guest wing was quieter than the main fortress. Smaller. The guards left her at the door without a word and disappeared back down the corridor. Seraphina stepped inside and locked the door behind her. The room was identical to the first one. Cold, functional. A bed, a window. A fireplace someone had finally lit. She moved to the fire and held her hands toward the flames, but the warmth didn't reach her. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Why did Draven let her stay? Why not expose her immediately? Why give her quarters and guards and the pretense of safety when he clearly knew something was wrong? She thought about the way he looked at her, not with desire, not with anger, with curiosity, like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. Kings who survive assassination attempts don't trust easily. They can't afford to. Every smile hides a blade. Every alliance masks betrayal. Every person who kneels might be waiting for the perfect moment to stand up and put a knife in your back. Draven Kaelor learned that lesson the hard way when his parents died choking on poisoned wine at a peace summit designed to unite the wolf territories. When his younger brother bled out on the floor beside them. When he crawled away from that table with his leg burning from the inside out, and his family dead, and an empire falling apart around him. He was 25 years old when it happened. 25 and crippled and alone and expected to hold together an empire built on violence and maintained through fear. Most men would have broken. Draven didn't. He got harder, sharper, more ruthless. He purged the court of anyone even remotely connected to the conspiracy, executed traitors publicly, made examples brutal enough that the entire empire understood what happened to people who tried to kill him. He survived, and survival changed him, turned him into exactly the kind of king people feared and followed because fear was easier than loyalty and obedience was safer than rebellion. Seraphina understood that now, understood why he didn't smile, why he didn't trust, why he let her keep her lies instead of demanding the truth, because the truth was a weapon. And Draven Kaelor collected weapons. A knock at the door made her jump. She turned. "Who is it?" A voice from the other side. Low. "Female, it's Warden Thessaly. Open the door." Seraphina hesitated. Then she unlocked it. The warden stepped inside carrying a tray of food. Bread, meat, something that might have been soup. She set it on the small table near the window and turned to leave. "Wait." Thessaly paused. Seraphina forced herself to ask, "Why did the king let me stay?" The warden's expression remained unreadable. "That's not my concern. Or yours. But he knows I'm lying." Thessaly's eyes hardened. "Everyone at this court is lying about something, girl. The difference is whether the king finds your lies useful or dangerous. You should hope you stay useful." "What happens if I stop being useful?" The warden smiled. Not kindly. "Then you become a lesson for the next person stupid enough to lie to him." She left. The door locked again. Seraphina stared at the food and felt her appetite die. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, trapped inside a fortress ruled by a king who survived poison and betrayal, and learned to turn both into weapons. And somewhere in the dark corners of Nightfang Crown, people were planning something. She could feel it. The same way she felt the weight of secrets crawling beneath her skin. Days passed like scars forming. Seraphina was allowed to wander certain parts of the fortress under guard supervision. She attended meals in the great hall where nobles whispered behind jeweled goblets and studied her like something diseased. She sat beside the king during councils and said nothing while men argued over borders and alliances and military strategy. Draven never spoke to her directly, but he watched, always watching. She felt his eyes on her constantly. During dinners when she picked at her food and tried not to look as terrified as she felt. During council meetings when Lord Maelor proposed troop movements that sounded reasonable but felt wrong in ways she couldn't explain. During training sessions in the lower courtyards when she stood on the balcony and watched him fight. That's when she saw the real damage. Draven trained alone. Early mornings before the rest of the court woke, he moved through sword forms with brutal efficiency despite the leg that should have made combat impossible. But it wasn't graceful. It was painful. She watched him favor his right side, watched him compensate for the left leg that didn't respond the way it should, watched him grit his teeth and push through movements that clearly hurt like hell, and she watched him refuse to stop. That's what survival looked like. Not victory, not triumph, not overcoming obstacles with inspirational music playing in the background. Just pain, discipline, refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier. Draven Kaelor was a man at war with his own body every single day, and he won that war through sheer stubborn brutality. It was horrifying, it was extraordinary, and it made Seraphina realize something she hadn't expected. She didn't pity him. Pity was useless. Pity was what soft people felt when they watched hard people survive. Pity was the emotion you indulged when you had the luxury of not understanding what real survival cost. Draven didn't need pity. He needed someone who understood that strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and getting back up anyway. She began noticing other things too. The way certain councilmen avoided eye contact with the king, the way servants moved through specific corridors at specific times carrying crates they didn't want seen, the way Lord Maelor Vex smiled whenever Draven's limp worsened after long sessions. Something was wrong. Seraphina didn't know what, didn't know why it mattered. But survival had taught her to recognize danger even when it wore friendly faces. And this court was full of friendly faces hiding knives. She started paying attention during council meetings, started listening to the words beneath the words, started watching who spoke and who stayed silent and who looked too comfortable when discussing things that should make them nervous. Lord Maelor Vex controlled the Eastern military forces. He was older than Draven by 15 years, silver-haired, distinguished, the kind of man who looked trustworthy because he'd spent decades perfecting the performance. But Seraphina watched him smile when the king struggled to stand after a 4-hour session. Watched him exchange glances with Lord Corwin Hale, who controlled the southern trade routes. Watched both of them look away too quickly when Draven asked direct questions about supply shipments. She didn't have proof, just instinct. And instinct was screaming. Late one night, unable to sleep, she left her quarters and wandered toward the lower levels of the fortress. The guards were gone. Shift change, maybe. She didn't question it. The corridors grew narrower, colder. Torches burned low and cast shadows that moved like living things. She heard voices. Seraphina froze. 2 men, speaking quietly behind a closed door marked with the crest of the royal apothecary. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. The shipment arrives before the solstice festival, enough to finish what we started. Another voice, older, familiar. And the girl? Expendable. Morel made that clear. Once the king is dead, nobody will care what happens to her. Seraphina's heart stopped. The first voice again. You're certain the poison won't be detected? It's the same wolfsbane that crippled him 7 years ago. Poetic, don't you think? Laughter, cold, cruel. The kind of laughter that came from men who'd already decided you were dead and were just waiting for the execution to catch up with reality. Seraphina backed away slowly. Her hands shook. Her breathing came too fast. They were going to kill Draven. And Lady Morel, her stepmother, was part of it. She turned and ran. Back through the corridors, up the stairs, past sleeping guards. She didn't stop until she reached her quarters and slammed the door shut behind her. Her mind screamed. This was why she was sent north. Not to marry the king, not to forge an alliance, to die beside him when the conspiracy struck. A distraction, a sacrifice. A loose end nobody would miss. Morel had spent 19 years treating Seraphina like an inconvenience. Now she was using her as bait. Send the bastard daughter north. Let her marry the crippled king. Let her sit beside him during the feast when the poison gets served. Let her die with him, so there's no witnesses, no complications, no annoying stepdaughter coming back south asking uncomfortable questions. Clean, efficient, cruel as hell. Seraphina pressed her back against the door and slid to the floor. Her chest felt tight, her vision blurred. Panic clawed at her throat. She should run, should find a way out of this fortress and disappear into the frozen wilderness. But where would she go? The South wanted her dead. The North didn't know she existed. And King Draven, the monster everyone feared, was the only person in this entire cursed kingdom who might actually let her live if she told him the truth. The realization hit her like a fist to the chest. She had to warn him, even if it meant exposing herself, even if it meant execution, because sitting in silence while assassins prepared to murder the king made her complicit. And Seraphina Vale, bastard daughter, unwanted stepdaughter, girl built from lies, refused to become a murderer. She thought about her mother, thought about the woman who loved the wrong man and paid for it with her life. Thought about how easy it would be to just stay quiet, keep her head down, survive. But survival through silence was just another word for cowardice. And Seraphina was done being a coward. Her mother had been brave enough to love despite knowing it would destroy her. The least Seraphina could do was be brave enough to speak despite knowing it might get her killed. She stood, hands still shaking, heart still racing, and made a decision that would either save her life or end it. Tomorrow, she would tell King Draven everything, and pray that the scarred Alpha had one last piece of mercy left inside his broken, brutal heart. But first she needed proof. Accusations without evidence were just noise, and Draven didn't strike her as the kind of king who acted on noise. He needed facts, details, something concrete he could use to crush the conspiracy before it crushed him. Seraphina waited until the fortress fell silent, until the torches burned low and the guards completed their rounds and the only sound was wind screaming against stone. Then she left her quarters again. This time she moved with purpose. Back down to the lower levels, back toward the apothecary chambers where she'd heard the voices. The door was locked. She expected that. What she didn't expect was how easy it was to pick the lock using a hairpin and stubbornness. Turned out being invisible for 19 years taught you useful skills, like breaking into places you weren't supposed to be, like moving quietly, like becoming a ghost when necessary. The door opened. Seraphina slipped inside and closed it behind her. The apothecary chamber was larger than expected. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles and jars and containers labeled in scripts she couldn't read, herbs hanging from ceiling hooks, a workbench covered in mortar and pestle sets and measuring instruments. And in the back corner, hidden behind a false panel she only found because she knocked against it accidentally, were the crates. Wooden, unmarked, sealed with wax. Seraphina's hands trembled as she pried one open. Inside were bottles, dozens of them, filled with dark liquid that looked almost black in the dim light. She uncorked one carefully and immediately recognized the smell. Bitter, metallic, wrong, wolfsbane, enough to kill an entire court. She stared at the bottles and felt everything click into place. The conspiracy wasn't just about killing Draven. It was about massacring everyone loyal to him, wiping out the entire royal court during the solstice festival when nobles from across the empire would be gathered in one place. A coup disguised as celebration. Seraphina's stomach turned. She needed to take one of these bottles. Needed physical proof she could show Draven, but before she could move, she heard footsteps, coming closer, fast. She barely had time to close the crate and slip behind a shelf before the door opened. 2 men entered. One she didn't recognize. The other was Lord Maelor Vex. "Check the shipment," Maelor said. "Make sure everything arrived intact." The other man moved toward the crates while Maelor stood watch near the door. Seraphina pressed herself against the wall and held her breath. Her heart slammed so hard she thought they'd hear it. The man checking the crates opened one, then another. Satisfied, he turned back to Maelor. "It's all here. Enough for 200 doses. The festival will be a bloodbath." Maelor smiled. "Good." And the girl? Still oblivious, still playing the role of dutiful bride. Morel chose well. Nobody suspects a thing. And when the king dies? We blame Southern radicals, execute a few convenient scapegoats. Then I take the throne and restore order. The empire will be grateful. The other man hesitated. And if Draven discovers the plot before the festival? Maelor's smile turned cold. Then we move the timeline. Kill him sooner. The girl dies with him either way. No witnesses, no complications. They left. The door closed. Seraphina waited until their footsteps faded completely before she moved. Her entire body shook. She grabbed one of the bottles from the crate, tucked it inside her cloak, and ran. Back through the corridors, back up the stairs, back to her quarters where she locked the door and collapsed against it. She had proof now, physical evidence of the conspiracy. Tomorrow she would bring it to Draven. Tomorrow she would tell him everything. Tomorrow she would either save his life or lose her own. But tonight, sitting alone in the darkness with a bottle of poison pressed against her chest, Seraphina Vale made peace with something she'd been running from her entire life. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't expendable. She was a girl with a choice, and she chose the truth, even if it killed her. Morning came too fast. Seraphina barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like an assassin. She sat by the window watching the sun rise over frozen cliffs and wondered if this would be her last sunrise. The bottle of wolfsbane sat on the table beside her, dark, deadly. Proof that someone wanted the king dead and didn't care who else died in the process. She needed to get it to Draven, needed to warn him before the solstice festival. But walking up to the king with poison and accusations felt like suicide. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was part of the conspiracy? What if he executed her for breaking into the apothecary chambers? Too many variables, too many ways this could go wrong. But doing nothing guaranteed death. His, hers, everyone loyal to the crown. So she made a plan, simple, direct, stupid as hell. She would request a private audience with the king, show him the poison, tell him everything she'd heard, let him decide what to do with her after. At least then she'd die knowing she tried. She dressed carefully, dark clothes, hair pulled back, the bottle hidden inside a pocket sewn into her cloak. Then she waited for the guards to arrive for their morning rounds. When they came, she was ready. "I need to speak with the king." The guards exchanged glances. One of them, a younger wolf with a scar across his jaw, frowned. "The king doesn't take requests from... I have information about a threat to his life." That got their attention. The older guard stepped closer. "What kind of threat?" Seraphina met his eyes. "The kind that kills kings during festivals. I need to speak with him, now." The guards looked at each other again. Then the older one nodded. Wait here." They left. Seraphina's heart hammered. This was it. No going back. She was either about to save Draven's life or sign her own death warrant. 20 minutes later, the guards returned. "The king will see you, but if you're wasting his time, you won't leave that room alive." Seraphina nodded. "I understand." They escorted her through the fortress. Different route this time. Fewer people. More security. They were taking her to the king's private chambers instead of the throne room. That meant Draven was taking the threat seriously, or preparing to kill her quietly. Hard to tell which. They stopped at a heavy wooden door guarded by 2 wolves who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. One of them knocked. A voice from inside. "Enter." The door opened. Seraphina stepped through. The chamber was smaller than expected. Functional. A desk covered in maps and reports. Weapons mounted on walls. A fireplace burning low. Windows overlooking the cliffs. And standing beside the desk, arms crossed, expression carved from stone, was King Draven Kaelor. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. The scar on his face stood out stark against pale skin. His storm gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her want to run. But she didn't. She stood her ground. The door closed behind her. They were alone. Draven spoke first. His voice was rough, dangerous. "My guards tell me you have information about a threat to my life." "I'm listening." Seraphina pulled the bottle from her cloak and set it on the desk between them. "Wolfsbane. Enough to kill everyone at the Solstice Festival. I found crates of it hidden in the apothecary chambers. Lord Maelor Vex is planning a coup. He intends to poison the court, blame Southern radicals, and take the throne." Draven stared at the bottle, then at her. Silence. Finally, he spoke. "How did you find this?" "I overheard him talking about it. Late at night, I went back and broke into the chambers to get proof. You broke into a secured royal facility." "Yes. You stole poison from a conspiracy you claim wants me dead." "Yes. And you're bringing it to me now because—" Seraphina's voice didn't shake. "Because letting you die makes me complicit. And I'm done being complicit in things that destroy people." Draven studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up the bottle, uncorked it, smelled it. His expression darkened. "This is the same poison that killed my family." "I know." He set the bottle down carefully, almost gently, like it was fragile instead of deadly. Then he looked at her again. "Why should I believe you?" Seraphina took a breath. "Because I have nothing to gain by lying. I'm already a fraud. I'm not noble blood. I'm a bastard daughter sent north to die beside you so my stepmother could clean up loose ends. If I wanted you dead, I'd just stay quiet and let the conspiracy do its job. But I don't want you dead. I want you alive. Because you're the only person in this entire kingdom who's been honest with me from the beginning." Draven's eyes narrowed. "Honest? You knew I was lying the moment I walked into your throne room. You could have exposed me, executed me. But you didn't. You let me keep my secrets. That's more honesty than anyone else has ever given me." The king was quiet for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just a short, bitter sound that carried years of exhaustion. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish." Seraphina smiled despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Probably both." Draven moved closer, stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the pain hidden beneath authority, the weight of ruling an empire that wanted him dead. "If what you're saying is true," he said quietly, "then half my council is compromised, which means I can't trust anyone." His eyes locked onto hers. "Except maybe you." Seraphina's heart stuttered. "Why me?" "Because you had every reason to let me die and chose to save me instead. That makes you either loyal or insane. And right now, I'll take either." He reached out and touched her face, just like he did in the throne room. But this time there was no performance, no audience. Just 2 people standing in a cold room holding secrets that could destroy them both. "Tell me everything," Draven said. "Every word you heard, every detail you saw. Leave nothing out." So she did. She told him about the voices behind the apothecary door, about Maelor and Mirel working together, about the plan to massacre the court during the festival, about being sent north as bait. She told him about her mother, about being a bastard, about 19 years of being invisible. She told him everything. And when she finished, Draven Kaelor looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You could have run," he said, "could have disappeared." "Why didn't you?" Seraphina met his eyes. "Because running just means dying slower, and I'm tired of being afraid." The king smiled, barely. "But it was there." "Good," he said, "because what comes next requires someone who isn't afraid to bleed." He moved to the desk and pulled out a map of Nightfang Crown, started marking locations, circling names. "We have 2 weeks until the Solstice Festival, 2 weeks to identify every conspirator, 2 weeks to turn their coup into a trap." Seraphina stepped closer. "What do you need me to do?" Draven looked at her. Really looked at her. "I need you to be exactly what they think you are. A scared southern girl playing at being queen. Let them think you're harmless. Let them think you're ignorant. And when they make their move, we'll be ready. And if they try to kill me before then you'll discover whether you're as strong as you claim." Seraphina's hands clenched. "I am." Draven's smile turned sharp, dangerous. "Good. Because the people trying to kill me don't fight fair, and neither do I." He handed her a small blade. "Silver, sharp. Keep this on you at all times. If anyone comes for you, don't hesitate. Kill them first. Ask questions later." Seraphina took the blade. It felt cold in her hand. "I've never killed anyone before." Draven's eyes held hers. "You will. And when you do, don't apologize for it. Survival doesn't ask for permission." He was right. Survival didn't ask. It demanded. And Seraphina was done asking for permission to exist. She tucked the blade into her boot and straightened her shoulders. "What happens now?" "Now," Draven said, "we go to war. Quietly. Carefully. But absolutely." He moved toward the door, paused, looked back at her. "One more thing." "Yes?" "Thank you. For choosing me instead of running." Seraphina's throat tightened. "I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made yours. That matters." He opened the door. The guards were waiting outside. Draven's voice shifted back to command. "Escort her back to her quarters. Double the guard. Nobody gets in or out without my permission." The guards nodded. Seraphina followed them back through the fortress. But everything felt different now. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a weapon, and King Draven Kaelor had just armed her. The days that followed were strange. Seraphina attended court functions like before, sat beside the king during meals, smiled when spoken to, played the role of dutiful bride. But beneath the performance, everything had changed. She watched, listened, cataloged every conversation, every glance, every interaction that felt wrong, and she reported it all back to Draven during secret meetings late at night when the fortress slept and only ghosts walked the halls. He was building a case, compiling evidence, identifying everyone involved in the conspiracy. Lord Maelor Vex, Lord Corwin Hale, 3 minor nobles from southern territories, 2 servants who'd been bribed, a guard captain who'd looked the other way, all of them working together to destroy the king and seize power. All of them about to learn what happened when you tried to kill a man who'd already survived the impossible. The Solstice Festival approached like a storm. Preparations consumed the fortress. Decorations, food, entertainment, nobles arriving from across the empire. Everyone excited for the celebration, nobody knowing it was supposed to be a massacre. Seraphina felt the weight of it constantly, felt the eyes of conspirators watching her, felt the pressure of secrets threatening to spill. But she didn't break. She smiled, laughed when appropriate, acted like a girl who had no idea the world was about to explode. And every night she met with Draven and they planned. Until finally, 3 days before the festival, everything fell into place. Draven called a private council meeting, just his most trusted advisors. Beta Ronan Vey, Warden Thessaly, Captain Lyra Thorne, and Seraphina. The conspirators weren't invited. That was deliberate. Draven spread maps across the table and looked at each person in turn. "In 3 days," he said quietly, "Lord Maelor and his allies will attempt to poison this court during the festival feast. They believe I'm ignorant. They're wrong." He detailed the plan, where guards would be positioned, which exits would be sealed, how they'd identify conspirators without causing panic. It was brutal, efficient, perfectly calculated, just like the king who designed it. When he finished, Ronan spoke first. "You're certain about this?" Draven nodded. "I have proof. Physical evidence, testimony. Everything we need." Warden Thessaly's expression darkened. "And the girl?" "She stays beside me," Draven said, "where I can protect her." He looked at Seraphina. She met his eyes without flinching. "Understand something," he said. "When this starts, it won't be clean. People will die. Blood will spill. And you'll see exactly what kind of man I am when survival is the only thing that matters." Seraphina's voice was steady. "I already know what kind of man you are." Draven's expression shifted. "What kind?" "The kind who survives, no matter the cost." The king smiled. "Dark, dangerous, good. Then you understand why they need to die." Seraphina nodded. "Because mercy was a luxury neither of them could afford anymore." The night before the festival, Seraphina couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching snow fall over Nightfang Crown and thought about everything that led her here. A bastard daughter nobody wanted, a girl sent north to die, a lie wrapped in silk. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being those things. She'd become someone who chose truth over survival, who chose courage over cowardice, who chose a broken king over the safety of silence. And tomorrow, she'd discover whether that choice saved her or destroyed her. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned. "Come in." The door opened. Draven stepped through. He looked different out of royal dress. Just leather and wool, hair loose, the scar on his face somehow less severe in firelight. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Seraphina shook her head. "You?" "Sleep is a luxury I stopped affording years ago." He moved closer, stopped beside her at the window. They stood in silence, watching the snow. Finally, Draven spoke. "When this is over, you can leave if you want. I'll make sure you're protected, give you resources, a new identity, whatever you need to start somewhere else." Seraphina looked at him. "And if I don't want to leave? Then you stay, as my queen, as my partner, as whatever you choose to be." His eyes met hers. "But understand what that means. Being with me, ruling beside me. It's not romantic, it's not safe. It's constant war, constant vigilance, constant survival." "I know. And you still want it?" Seraphina smiled. "I don't want it, but I choose it anyway." Draven's expression softened. "Why?" "Because you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw someone worth saving." The king reached out and touched her face. Gentle, careful, like she was something precious instead of expendable. "You saved yourself," he said quietly. "I just gave you permission to stop pretending otherwise." Then he kissed her. Not desperate, not performative, just honest. The kiss of two people who'd survived hell separately and found each other on the other side. When they pulled apart, Seraphina's heart was racing. Draven rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "everything changes." Seraphina closed her eyes. "I know. Are you ready?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." The king smiled against her skin. "That's all survival ever asks." He stayed with her that night, not for anything inappropriate, just presence. Two people sitting together in the darkness, knowing that morning would bring violence and blood and the kind of choices that leave scars. And when dawn finally broke over Nightfang Crown, they were ready. The solstice festival began with music and light. The great hall transformed into something almost beautiful. Chandeliers blazing, tables overflowing with food, nobles dressed in their finest. Everyone celebrating, nobody knowing this was supposed to be their execution. Seraphina sat beside Draven at the high table wearing crimson velvet-like armor. The king looked every inch the ruler. Black clothes, crown of iron, expression carved from stone, but beneath the table his hand found hers. Squeezed once, a promise. "We survived this together." The feast progressed, courses served, wine poured, toasts made. Seraphina watched Lord Maelor, watched him smile and laugh and play the role of loyal councilman, watched him exchange glances with the other conspirators, watched him wait for the perfect moment. It came during the ceremonial toast. An elder approached, carrying the sacred goblet meant for the king alone. The poisoned wine shimmered dark red beneath candlelight. The hall fell silent, every eye on Draven. The king accepted the goblet, lifted it, and Seraphina held her breath. This was it, the moment everything either worked or failed catastrophically. Draven raised the goblet toward the elder. "A king should never drink alone," he declared. The elder froze. Panic flashed across his face. Lord Maelor's smile disappeared, and suddenly everything exploded. Draven hurled the goblet across the hall. Wine splashed across marble like blood. Guards flooded in from every entrance. Steel screamed from scabbards. Nobles overturned tables. The conspirators moved. Maelor drew a blade and lunged toward the king, but Draven was already moving. The crippled leg that everyone thought made him weak became a weapon. He used it to bait Maelor into overextending, then drove his own blade through the man's shoulder with brutal efficiency. Maelor screamed. Chaos consumed the hall. Seraphina pressed herself against the throne and watched violence unfold like a nightmare made real. This was what survival looked like. Not heroic, not clean, just blood and steel and the desperate scramble to keep breathing. Captain Lyra Thorne cut down 2 conspirators near the eastern entrance. Ronan Vey tackled Lord Corwin and drove him into the floor. Warden Thessaly moved through the crowd like death itself, identifying traitors with cold precision. And at the center of it all stood King Draven Kaelor, fighting like a man who'd survived assassination once and refused to let it happen again. He moved with terrible grace despite the damaged leg. Every strike calculated, every movement efficient, no wasted energy, no mercy, just survival distilled into violence. Seraphina watched him and understood something fundamental. This was the man the world had made. Broken, brutal, unyielding, beautiful in the way natural disasters are beautiful, terrifying and unstoppable. The fighting lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, 23 conspirators lay dead or subdued. The hall fell silent except for heavy breathing and the drip of blood on marble. Draven stood at the center of it all, sword still drawn, breathing hard. His eyes found Seraphina. "You all right?" She nodded. Her voice came out steady. "I'm alive." "Good." He turned toward the assembled nobles, those who weren't involved, those who stood frozen in shock. "Let this be a lesson," he said. His voice carried across the hall. Cold, absolute. Betrayal has consequences, and I don't forgive. He gestured toward the bodies. "These men thought my scars made me weak. They were wrong. Broken wolves bite hardest." Then he looked at Lord Maelor, bleeding on the floor. "You have one chance to tell me who else is involved. Names, locations, everything." Maelor spat blood. "You're a dead man, Draven. This isn't over." The king's expression didn't change. "Yes, it is." He drove his blade through Maelor's throat. The body collapsed. Silence consumed the hall. Draven turned and walked back toward the throne. "The festival is over. Everyone leave, now." The nobles fled. Guards dragged away the bodies, and suddenly the great hall stood empty except for Draven, Seraphina, and the loyal few who'd helped them survive. The king sat down heavily on the throne, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Seraphina moved toward him. "It's over," she said softly. Draven looked at her. "No, it's just beginning. What do you mean?" He gestured towards the blood-stained floor. "This was one conspiracy. There will be others. There always are. People will always want what I have. Will always think they can take it." His eyes met hers. "The question is whether you still want to stand beside me knowing that." Seraphina sat down on the step below the throne, looked up at the broken king who'd survived everything and kept fighting. "Yes," she said. "I do." Draven smiled, barely, but it was real. "Then welcome to Nightfang Crown, Queen Seraphina. Hope you're ready for war." She took his scarred hand in hers. "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it yet." And in that moment, everything crystallized. They weren't perfect, weren't healed, weren't saved, but they were alive. And survival, Seraphina realized, was its own kind of victory. Outside, snow continued falling over the frozen empire. But inside Nightfang Crown, 2 people who'd been broken by the world sat together in the darkness and chose each other anyway. The blood on the wall was still wet. Seraphina stared at the message carved into stone. her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to crack bone. The words dripped red in the torchlight like a promise written in violence. Morel sends her regards. The real game starts now. Behind her, Draven's voice cut through the silence like a blade scraping ice. What is it? She turned. The king stood 3 feet away, sword still drawn, blood spattering his clothes. His storm-gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her lungs forget how to work. Seraphina pointed at the wall. Draven's expression went dead. Not angry, not shocked, just flat. The face of a man who'd already calculated every possible threat and expected all of them. He crossed the distance in 4 strides despite the limp that should have slowed him down. Studied the message. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. The servant girl who left this, where did she go? Seraphina's throat closed. I don't know. She disappeared into the corridors near the kitchens. Draven turned toward Captain Lyra Thorne, who stood near the eastern entrance wiping blood from her blade. Find her. Lock down every exit. Nobody leaves this fortress. Nobody. Lyra nodded and vanished. Beta Ronin Vey stepped closer, his face grim. Your Majesty, if Lady Morel has operatives inside Nightfang Crown, then we root them out, Draven interrupted. All of them, starting now. He looked at Warden Thessaly. Interrogate every servant who's been hired in the last 6 months. Anyone with southern connections. Anyone who can't account for their movements tonight. Thessaly's expression remained carved from stone. It will be done. The warden left. Draven stood in the center of the blood-stained hall, surrounded by the corpses of men who'd tried to kill him, and Seraphina watched something shift in his eyes. Not fear. Calculation. This is what ruling looked like when survival was the only currency that mattered. You didn't panic. You didn't hesitate. You identified the threat and cut it out before it spread. Cold, efficient, brutal. The king turned back to her. You're coming with me. Stay close. Don't leave my sight. Seraphina nodded. Where are we going? Somewhere those bastards can't reach you. He grabbed her hand. Not gently, not carefully, just firm enough to mean you're mine now, and I'm not letting go. And pulled her toward the northern tower. They moved through corridors emptied by violence. Guards stood at every intersection, faces hard, weapons drawn. The entire fortress had shifted into war mode. Silent, deadly. Waiting for the next attack. Draven's hand never left hers. They reached his private chambers and he locked the door behind them, threw the bolt, checked the windows. Then he turned and looked at her. Really looked at her. Tell me everything about Morel. Every connection she has. Every alliance. Every piece of leverage she might use. Seraphina's mind raced. She's married to Alpha Lucian Vale, but the real power is hers. She controls the Southern Merchant Guilds through her family name. Has alliances with at least 4 other noble houses. She's... Draven held up a hand. Stop. Not the public face. The private one. What does she want? Power, Seraphina said immediately. Control. She married Lucian because he gave her access to House Valkaren's resources. But she's always wanted more. A throne. An empire. And she's willing to kill for it. She's willing to do anything for it. The king nodded slowly. Then this isn't over. Maelor was just the first move. She'll send more. Better. Smarter. His eyes burned into hers. And she'll use you to get to me. Seraphina's stomach twisted. I know. Do you? Because understanding it intellectually and surviving it are different things. He moved closer. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of 7 years ruling an empire that wanted him dead. The scars, physical and otherwise, that came from surviving when everyone expected you to die. I've spent my entire reign fighting people who think I'm weak, Draven said quietly. People who look at this leg and see an opportunity. Who think a crippled king can't hold a throne. His hand touched her face, rough fingers against skin too soft for this world. But you're different. You're not a soldier, not a wolf. You're a girl who spent 19 years being invisible and suddenly everyone's looking at you. Seraphina's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm stronger than I look. Draven smiled. Dark. Dangerous. I know. That's why I'm keeping you alive. He pulled away and moved to the window. stared out at the frozen empire sprawling beneath Nightfang Crown. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of something heavier than fear. There's a reason kings become monsters. It's not because power corrupts, it's because the world teaches you that mercy gets you killed, that trust is a weapon your enemies use against you, that the only way to survive is to make everyone else more afraid of you than you are of them. He turned back to face her. I became that monster 7 years ago. The night wolfsbane poison burned through my leg while I watched my family die. I made a choice, either break or become something harder than whatever tried to break me. His eyes held hers. You're making that same choice right now. Either run and spend the rest of your life hiding, or stay and become something strong enough to survive beside me. Seraphina's hands clenched. I already made my choice. Then understand what it costs. Because from this moment forward, you're a target. Every enemy I have becomes your enemy. Every conspiracy aimed at me includes you. Every assassination attempt might kill you first just to hurt me. Good, Seraphina said. Let them try. Draven's expression shifted. Something almost like pride flickered across his face. You mean that? Yes. Why? Because I'm done being afraid, done being invisible, done letting people like Morel decide whether I live or die. She stepped closer. You asked me earlier why I chose to stay. This is why. Not because I love you, not because this is romantic, but because standing beside you means I finally get to fight back. And I'd rather die fighting than live running. The king stared at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not soft, hard enough to bruise, desperate enough to mean you're mine and I'm keeping you. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Draven's voice came out rough. If we're doing this, we do it my way. You follow my orders. You trust my instincts. You don't question me in front of the court. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. And in private? In private, you can tell me I'm wrong all you want. But in public, we're a united front. One weakness, one crack. That's all our enemies need. She understood. This wasn't about control. It was about survival. In a court where everyone watched for signs of division, showing any disagreement meant giving your enemies ammunition. So you presented a wall. Unbreakable. United. Even if behind closed doors you fought like wolves. Fine, Seraphina said. But I'm not some decoration you parade around to look legitimate. If I'm your queen, I get a voice. A real one. Draven's smile turned sharp. I wouldn't want you any other way. A knock at the door interrupted them. The king's expression went cold again. Instantly, like a mask slamming into place. What? Captain Lyra's voice came from the other side. We found her. The servant girl. She's in the dungeons. Draven looked at Seraphina. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. I'm coming with you. No. Yes. You just said we're a united front. That starts now. The king's jaw tightened. This isn't a negotiation. Neither is this. If you're interrogating someone who works for Morel, I need to be there. I know her. I know how she thinks. I can help. Draven stared at her, then nodded once. Fine. But you follow my lead. And if things get ugly, they will. When things get ugly, you don't look away. Understood? Seraphina met his eyes. Understood. They left the chambers together. The dungeons beneath Nightfang Crown smelled like old blood and despair. Stone walls wept moisture. Iron bars rusted in the damp. Torches burned low, casting shadows that moved like living things. The servant girl sat chained to a chair in the center of the largest cell. Young, maybe 20. Brown hair, ordinary face. The kind of person you'd never notice in a crowd. Perfect for a spy. Captain Lyra stood beside her, arms crossed. Beta Ronin leaned against the wall near the door. Warden Thessaly watched from the corner with an expression that could freeze blood. The girl looked up when Draven entered and smiled. Not afraid, not nervous, amused. Your Majesty, she said. How kind of you to visit. Draven's voice came out flat. Name. The girl's smile widened. Does it matter? I'm already dead, we both know that. The king moved closer, stopped 3 feet away. I'll ask one more time. Name. Elara. Elara Thorn. No relation to your captain, unfortunately. Just a girl who took a job that paid better than scrubbing floors. Who hired you? Alara laughed. You know who? Say it anyway. Lady Morelle Vale. She pays well. Promised me a new life in the Southern Territories after the king fell. Her eyes shifted to Seraphina. Hello, stepdaughter. Morelle sends her love. Said to tell you that running north just delayed the inevitable. Seraphina's blood went cold. Draven's hand touched her lower back. Steadying, protective. How many others? He asked Alara. Others? Operatives. Spies. How many does Morelle have inside my fortress? Alara shrugged. Enough. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Draven's expression didn't change. He gestured to Captain Lyra. Lyra stepped forward and backhanded Alara hard enough to snap her head sideways. Blood sprayed from split lips. The girl spat red onto the stone floor, laughed again. You think pain scares me? I grew up in the slums of House Valkyrian's territory. Pain is just another Tuesday. Draven crouched down so he was eye level with her. I'm not interested in scaring you. I'm interested in information. Give me names, locations, timelines, and I'll make your death quick. Alara met his gaze without flinching. And if I don't, then I'll make it slow. Very slow. And everyone in this fortress will hear you scream. Silence. The girl's smile finally faltered, because she saw something in Draven's eyes. Something cold and absolute. The promise of a man who'd survived wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 7 years of constant attempts on his life. A man who didn't bluff. Fine, Alara whispered. I'll talk. Smart. But first she looked at Seraphina again. You should know something, little stepsister. Morelle didn't send you north to die beside the king. She sent you north to destroy him from the inside. Seraphina's stomach dropped. What? Think about it. A scared girl. No power. No connections. The king keeps you alive out of curiosity. You get close, earn his trust, and when the time is right, you put a blade in his back. Her smile returned. Vicious. That was always the plan. Use you as the weapon. Then kill you after to tie up loose ends. Seraphina's hand shook. I would never... Alara laughed. Doesn't matter what you would or wouldn't do. What matters is what Morelle thinks you'll do when she threatens the people you care about. When she promises to spare Celestine if you cooperate. When she makes killing the king the only way to save anyone you love. Draven stood. His voice cut through the cell like a whip. Enough. He looked at Lyra. Get the names. Get everything. Then execute her. Lyra nodded. Draven turned and walked out. Seraphina followed, legs numb, mind screaming. They made it halfway up the stairs before she broke. Stop. Draven paused. Seraphina grabbed his arm, forced him to face her. Is that true? Would Morelle use Celestine against me? The king's expression softened. Barely. Yes. And you think I'd betray you to save her? Draven studied her face for a long moment. No. I think you'd try to find another way. And that's what would get you killed. Seraphina's throat tightened. Celestine is my stepsister. We're not close, but she's the only family you have left who might actually care if you die. He touched her face. Morelle knows that. She'll use it. She'll make you choose. And when you hesitate, she'll kill you both anyway. So what do? You accept that some people can't be saved. That loyalty to the dead is easier than loyalty to the living. And that survival sometimes means cutting out the parts of yourself that make you vulnerable. His eyes burned into hers. Can you do that? Seraphina thought about Celestine, about the golden-haired girl who'd never been cruel but had never been kind either, who existed in the background of Seraphina's life like wallpaper, present but not meaningful. Could she let Celestine die to save herself? I don't know, she whispered. Draven nodded. Then we'll find out together. He pulled her close. Not romantic, just solid, anchoring. Whatever Morelle sends next, we face it as one. You don't make decisions alone. You don't sacrifice yourself trying to be a hero. You trust me to keep you alive, and I'll trust you to watch my back. Deal? Seraphina pressed her forehead against his chest and breathed. Deal. They stood there in the stairwell while below them a spy screamed answers, and above them an empire waited for its next war. And Seraphina realized something fundamental about the man holding her. Draven Kaelor wasn't a monster because he enjoyed violence. He was a monster because violence was the only language his enemies understood. And if she was going to survive beside him, she needed to learn that language too. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. Captain Lyra extracted 17 names, 12 servants, 3 guards, 2 minor nobles, all working for Morel, all executed before dawn. Draven watched each execution personally, stood in the courtyard while the headsman's blade fell and blood stained frozen stone. Seraphina stood beside him. She didn't look away, because looking away meant weakness. And weakness in this world got you killed. After the last body fell, Draven turned to Ronan, spread the word. Anyone caught conspiring against the crown dies. No trials, no mercy, just execution. Ronan's expression remained grim. That's going to make you even more enemies. Good. Let them fear me more than they hate me. The beta nodded and left. Draven looked at Seraphina. How are you holding up? She thought about lying, thought about saying she was fine, but lies were what got her into this mess in the first place. I feel sick, she said honestly. Watching people die is harder than I expected. The king's hand found hers. It gets easier. That's the worst part. Does it ever stop bothering you? No, you just get better at ignoring it. They walked back toward the fortress together. The sun was rising over frozen cliffs, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Inside Nightfang Crown, servants cleaned the great hall, scrubbed away the evidence of last night's violence, replaced broken furniture, covered bloodstains with fresh tapestries, making everything look normal again. But normal was a lie. Everyone knew it. The Solstice Festival had turned into a massacre. The King's Council was compromised. Enemy operatives had infiltrated the fortress itself. And somewhere south, Lady Betrayal Vale was planning her next move. Draven called an emergency council meeting at noon. The surviving members gathered in the war room. A dozen hard-faced wolves who'd proven their loyalty through blood. Maps covered the table. Reports stacked in corners. The king stood at the head of the table, Seraphina beside him. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Betrayal Vale has declared war. Not publicly, not officially, but war nonetheless. She wants my throne. She wants this empire. And she's willing to burn everything to get it. He slammed his fist on the table. So we burn her first. Lord Aaron Blackwater, a northern commander loyal since Draven took the crown, leaned forward. What are you proposing? A purge, Draven said flatly. Every southern territory with ties to Morel gets investigated. Every noble house that supported her conspiracy gets dismantled. Every resource she controls gets seized. Another councilman spoke up. Your Majesty, that's half the Southern Empire. If we move that aggressively, then we show the entire kingdom what happens when you try to kill me, Draven interrupted. Fear is a better deterrent than diplomacy. Warden Thessaly's voice cut through the tension. And the girl. Everyone looked at Seraphina. She felt the weight of their stares, felt their suspicion, felt them wondering if she was part of the conspiracy or just another pawn. Draven's hand moved to her shoulder. Possessive, protective. The girl stays. She's the reason half of you are still breathing. She uncovered the conspiracy. She warned me. She's proven her loyalty. His eyes scanned the room. Anyone who questions that can leave. Now. Silence. Nobody moved. Good. Then let's get to work. The council meeting lasted 4 hours. They discussed strategy, troop movements, supply lines, which territories to target first, how to dismantle Morel's network without triggering open rebellion. Seraphina listened, learned, watched how Draven commanded the room without raising his voice, how he turned every objection into an opportunity, how he made men twice his age defer to his authority through sheer force of will. This was what real power looked like. Not crowns or thrones or titles, just the ability to make people believe you'd survive anything they threw at you. And Draven Kaelor had spent 7 years proving exactly that. When the meeting finally ended, Seraphina's head throbbed. Draven noticed immediately. You need rest. I'm fine. You're exhausted. Don't lie. She smiled despite the fatigue clawing at her bones. Takes one to know one. The king's expression softened. Fair. They returned to his chambers. Inside, away from watching eyes and listening ears, Draven finally let the mask slip. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed and rubbed his left leg, pain carved into every line of his face. Seraphina knelt in front of him. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. Let me help." "There's nothing you can—" "Let me try." She rolled up his pant leg carefully. The scar tissue was extensive, ugly. Burns from wolfsbane poison that had eaten through muscle and nerve. She'd seen injuries before. Servants at House Valkyrin with broken bones or cuts from kitchen accidents. But this was different. This was the physical evidence of someone trying to destroy him. And failing. Her fingers touched the scarred skin gently. Draven flinched. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. Just... No one touches that. Ever. I'm not no one." His eyes met hers. "No. You're not." She worked carefully, massaging the damaged muscle, loosening knots. It wasn't much. Probably didn't actually help. But Draven's breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased, and for just a moment the king who ruled through fear allowed himself to be vulnerable. "Thank you," he said quietly. Seraphina looked up at him. "For what? For staying, for not running, for being strong enough to stand in a room full of wolves and not back down." He pulled her up onto the bed beside him. "I've spent 7 years alone, trusting no one, believing that isolation was safer than connection, and maybe it was. But you changed that." His hand cupped her face. "You made me believe that having something worth protecting doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. Because now I don't just fight for survival. I fight for you." Seraphina's heart slammed against her ribs. "Draven, He kissed her before she could finish. Not desperate, not rough, just honest. The kiss of a man who'd spent years building walls and finally found someone worth tearing them down for. When they broke apart, Seraphina's voice came out shaky. "What happens now?" "Now," Draven said. "We go to war. We dismantle Morel's network. We secure the Empire. We survive." His eyes burned into hers. "Together." Seraphina nodded. Together. They fell asleep tangled in each other, exhaustion finally winning. And for the first time in 7 years, King Draven Kaelor slept without nightmares. But peace never lasted. 3 days later, a messenger arrived from the south. Draven read the letter in his private study, Seraphina beside him. His expression went dead. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter. The message was simple, brutal. "King Draven Kaelor, you executed 17 of my operatives. I will execute 17 of yours. Starting with Seraphina Vale. You have 1 week to release Seraphina and withdraw your forces from southern territories, or your bride's sister dies screaming. Lady Morel Vale." Seraphina's hands shook. Celestine. Morel had Celestine, and she was going to kill her unless Seraphina surrendered. "This is what Alara warned about," Draven said quietly. "This is the choice. Your sister's life or yours." Seraphina's mind raced. Celestine had never been kind, had never protected her, had stood by while Morel treated Seraphina like dirt, but she was still family. Still the only person in House Valkyrin who'd occasionally looked at Seraphina like she was human instead of furniture. "I can't let her die," Seraphina whispered. Draven turned her to face him. "If you go back, Morel kills you both. You know that." "Maybe. But if I don't try, then Celestine dies and you live. That's survival. That's not survival. That's cowardice." The king's eyes hardened. "No. Cowardice is throwing your life away for someone who wouldn't do the same for you. You don't know that." "Don't I?" He grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. Morel doesn't want to trade. She wants you dead. Celestine is bait. The moment you step foot in Southern Territory, you're done. So what do I do? Just let her die?" "Yes." The word hung between them like a blade. Seraphina jerked back. "I can't." "Then you die with her. Is that what you want?" "No. But I can't live knowing I had a chance to save her and didn't take it." Draven's expression shifted, something between fury and desperation. "You're asking me to let you walk into a trap, to watch you sacrifice yourself for someone who means nothing to you. She means something, not enough." His voice rose. "I'm not losing you for this. I won't. You don't get to decide that. The hell I don't. You're my queen, my responsibility, mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have scared her. Instead, it made something fierce and hot bloom in her chest. I'm not a possession, she said quietly. No. You're worse. You're the one thing in this world I can't afford to lose. Then help me save her. Draven stared at her. Then he laughed. Once. Bitter. You're going to get us both killed, probably. And you still want to try? Yes. The king closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, something had changed. Fine. But we do this smart. No heroics. No self-sacrifice. We go in with a plan, and we come out alive. Both of us. His hand touched her face. Understand? Seraphina nodded, and felt the world shift beneath her feet. Because this wasn't just about saving Celestine anymore. This was about proving that she and Draven could face Morel together and win. That survival didn't mean choosing between love and loyalty. It meant finding a way to keep both, even if it cost them everything else. The plan took 2 days to build. Draven assembled his most trusted wolves, Ronan, Lyra, Aaron Blackwater, Warden Thessaly. They pored over maps of southern territories, identified Morel's strongholds, plotted routes, calculated risks. It was insane, suicidal, and their only option. The strategy was simple on paper, complicated as hell in execution. A small strike team would infiltrate House Valkyrian's fortress under cover of darkness, extract Celestine, get out before Morel's forces could respond. Draven would lead personally. Seraphina fought him on that. You can't risk the king, she argued. If you die. I don't, he interrupted, because I'm too stubborn to give Morel the satisfaction. This isn't a joke. Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't. His expression was carved from stone. Absolute. I'm not sending you into enemy territory without me. That's final. Seraphina wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being reckless, but she saw the determination in his eyes, the refusal to let her face this alone. And she understood. This wasn't about tactics or strategy. This was about the fact that Draven Kaelor had spent 7 years alone and refused to go back to that, even if it meant risking everything. Fine, she whispered. We go together. The king pulled her close. Together. They left Nightfang Crown at midnight, 12 wolves, horses bred for endurance, weapons hidden beneath traveling cloaks. The journey south took 3 days. Hard riding, minimal rest. They avoided main roads, stuck to mountain passes and forest trails where Morel's scouts wouldn't see them coming. Draven rode beside Seraphina the entire time, silent, watchful. His hand never strayed far from the sword at his hip. She watched him compensate for the damaged leg, watched him grit his teeth through pain he refused to acknowledge, watched him push forward with the same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept him alive this long. And she realized something. Loving this man meant accepting that he'd fight until he couldn't anymore, that survival was his religion and surrender wasn't in his vocabulary, that he'd burn the world before he let it take anything else from him. It was terrifying. It was extraordinary. And it made her love him more. They reached House Valkyrian's territory on the 3rd night. The fortress rose from rolling hills like a monument to southern wealth, white stone, gold trim. Gardens that stayed green even in winter through expensive enchantments. Beautiful, arrogant, vulnerable. Draven studied it from the tree line. 12 guards at the main gate, patrols every hour. Kitchen entrance on the eastern side. That's our way in. Ronan frowned. Too exposed. Then we make it fast. The beta nodded. They waited until the patrol passed, then moved, silent as death. Fast as wolves hunting. The kitchen entrance was locked, but Lyra picked it in seconds. They slipped inside. The fortress was quiet. Most of the household asleep. Draven led them through corridors Seraphina remembered from childhood, past the great hall where she'd eaten in silence, past the sitting rooms where Morel held court, past the chambers where she'd spent 19 years invisible. Everything familiar, everything hateful. They reached the guest wing where Morel kept prisoners. 2 guards stood outside. Draven didn't hesitate. He moved like violence itself, sword drawn, throat cut before the first guard could scream. The second died a heartbeat later. Blood pooled on expensive carpet. Lyra checked the cells, found Celestine in the third one. The girl looked terrible. Bruised, bloodied, chained to the wall like an animal, but alive. Her eyes went wide when she saw Seraphina. "You came." Seraphina's throat tightened. "Of course I came." Lyra broke the chains. Celestine collapsed. Ronan caught her. "Can you walk?" Celestine nodded weakly. "I think so." "Good. Because we're leaving. Now." They turned to leave, and found Lady Morell standing in the doorway, surrounded by 20 armed guards. The woman smiled, cold, victorious. "Hello, Seraphina. I knew you'd come. You're predictable that way." Draven stepped forward, sword raised. "Back away." Morell laughed. "Or what? You'll kill me?" "Please." "You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and completely trapped." Her eyes glittered. "Drop your weapons, or I have my guards fill this room with arrows. And we see how many of you survive." Draven's jaw tightened, but he didn't lower his sword. Seraphina's mind raced. This was the trap. The inevitable conclusion. Morell had planned for everything, and now they were going to die. Unless... Seraphina stepped forward. "Let them go. Take me instead." Draven grabbed her arm. "No." She pulled free. "You wanted me. Here I am. Let everyone else leave, and I'll surrender." Morell's smile widened. "How noble." "Unfortunately, I want you all dead." She gestured to the guards. "Kill them." The guards raised their weapons, and Seraphina made a choice. She grabbed the knife from her boot, the one Draven gave her weeks ago, and pressed it against her own throat. "Stop." Everyone froze. Morell's expression shifted. "What are you doing? Ending this. You want me dead? Fine. But if your guards attack, I slit my own throat and you get nothing. No leverage, no victory, just a corpse." Draven's voice came out strangled. "Seraphina." "Trust me," she whispered. Then louder to Morell. "Call off your guards, let my people leave, and I'll come quietly." The stepmother stared at her, then laughed. "You think I care if you kill yourself? That just saves me the trouble." Seraphina's hand tightened on the knife. "Then why haven't you told your guards to shoot?" Because Morell hadn't. Because despite everything, the woman wanted Seraphina alive, wanted the satisfaction of killing her personally, wanted to watch her break. And that was the weakness. Morell's eyes narrowed. "Fine, your wolves can leave, but you stay, and so does the king." "No," Seraphina said, "just me. Both of you or everyone dies." Draven stepped beside her. "Then we both stay." Seraphina's heart stopped. "What are you doing? What you're doing? Except I'm not letting you do it alone." He looked at Ronan. "Get Celestine out. Get back to Nightfang Crown. If we're not back in 3 days, assume we're dead and prepare for war." "Your Majesty?" "That's an order." Ronan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Lyra looked at Draven. "We'll come back for you." "I know." The wolves left, taking Celestine with them, leaving Seraphina and Draven alone with Morell and her guards. The stepmother smiled. "How romantic! The crippled king and his bastard bride, dying together." She gestured to the guards. "Chain them." They were dragged to the dungeons beneath House Valkarin, thrown into a cell, chained to opposite walls. Morell stood outside the bars. "You have 1 day to think about your mistakes. Then I execute you both publicly. Let the entire empire watch what happens to people who defy me." She left. The door slammed. Darkness consumed everything. Seraphina pulled against the chains. They didn't budge. Across the cell, she heard Draven breathing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "Getting you killed." The king laughed. "Rough, exhausted. You didn't get me killed. I walked in here knowing exactly what would happen." "Then why?" "Because losing you would have killed me anyway. At least this way we're together." Silence. Then Seraphina's voice, barely audible. "I love you." Draven's chains rattled as he moved. "I know. That's it? I love you? And you say I know? What do you want me to say? That you love me too?" Silence stretched. Then quietly, "I've spent 7 years believing love was weakness. That caring about anyone made you vulnerable, that the only way to survive was to cut out everything soft and become something sharp." His voice roughened. And then you walked into my throne room carrying lies and fear, and somehow I ended up caring anyway. You're the worst thing that ever happened to me, because now I have something to lose again. Now I'm vulnerable. Now I'm terrified. Chains rattled. So yes, I love you, and I hate that I love you, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Seraphina's eyes burned. We're going to die down here, aren't we? Probably. I'm scared. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. She laughed despite everything. Even now you sound like a king. That's because I am one, and kings don't quit. His voice hardened. We're not dead yet. So we keep fighting. Understood? Understood. They sat in darkness, chained, trapped, waiting for death. But somehow knowing Draven was there made it bearable. Because survival wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking together and getting back up anyway. The darkness in the dungeon felt alive. Seraphina had lost track of time. Hours. Maybe days. The cold seeped into her bones until she couldn't remember what warmth felt like. Her wrists bled where the iron shackles cut into skin. Every breath tasted like rust and despair. Across the cell, she heard Draven shifting, testing the chains, again, for the 100th time. Still won't break, she said quietly. His voice came back rough. I know. Then why keep trying? Because giving up means accepting we're already dead. And I'm not dead yet. Seraphina almost smiled. Even chained in a dungeon waiting for execution, the scarred alpha refused to surrender. It would have been inspiring if it wasn't so tragic. She thought about what he'd said earlier, about loving her, about hating that he loved her. The words had carved themselves into her chest like a brand. This was what power did to people. It made them believe that caring was weakness, that vulnerability meant death, that the only way to survive was to become something harder than whatever tried to break you. Draven had spent 7 years building those walls, and she'd somehow torn them down without even trying. Now they were both going to die for it. The irony tasted bitter. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Seraphina tensed. This was it. The execution. Morel coming to drag them upstairs and make a spectacle of their deaths. But when the door opened, it wasn't Morel. It was Celestine. The golden-haired girl stepped into the torchlight looking healthier than she had any right to. The bruises were gone. The blood cleaned away. She wore a pristine white dress that caught the firelight like snow. And she was smiling, not with relief, not with gratitude, with satisfaction. Seraphina's stomach dropped. Celestine? The girl's smile widened. Hello, stepsister. Enjoying your accommodations? What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be on your way back to Nightfang Crown? Celestine laughed, soft, musical. The same laugh that had charmed noblemen across the southern territories. Why would I go back there? When everything I want is right here. She moved closer to the bars. You always were slow, Seraphina, even as children, always the last to understand what was happening around you. Seraphina's mind raced. No. Celestine tilted her head. No what? You weren't captured. You were never in danger. The girl's expression shifted. Impressed. Finally. Yes. I volunteered. Morel needed bait and I needed you out of the way. So I played the victim. Let myself get a few bruises to sell the performance. And you fell for it completely. Draven's voice cut through the cell like a blade. You set us up. Celestine turned her attention to the king. Your Majesty, the great scarred alpha. Everyone says you're so intelligent, so strategic, so impossible to fool. She smiled. But you walked right into our trap because of her, because you loved her enough to risk everything. Her eyes glittered in the torchlight. That's the difference between you and Morel. You think love makes you strong. She knows it makes you weak. Seraphina's chains rattled as she pulled forward. Why? What did I ever do to you? You existed, Celestine said simply. You were the reminder that father couldn't keep his pants on. The bastard daughter who made our family look weak. The inconvenience mother had to dress up and pretend was noble just to avoid scandal. Her voice turned sharp. And then you got sent north. You were supposed to die with the crippled king when the coup succeeded. You were supposed to disappear so I could finally stop competing with a ghost. But you survived. You warned him. You ruined everything, so we had to adapt. Use you differently. Make you the weapon that destroyed him instead. Understanding crashed over Seraphina like freezing water. This entire thing, the rescue, the infiltration, getting captured, all of it had been designed to get Draven into this cell, away from his fortress, away from his loyal wolves, away from everything that made him powerful, stripped down to just a man in chains, vulnerable, breakable, dead. Celestine reached into her dress and pulled out a small vial. Dark liquid sloshed inside. Wolfsbane, she said conversationally. The same poison that killed the king's family 7 years ago. Poetic, don't you think? Draven's voice remained flat. You're going to poison us. Not us. Just you. Seraphina gets to watch. Then she gets executed publicly tomorrow as your co-conspirator. The bastard girl who helped assassinate the king. She uncorked the vial. Morel wanted me to make it quick, but I think slow is better. Let you feel it burn through your veins the way it did last time. Let you die knowing you failed, that you trusted the wrong person, that love destroyed you. Seraphina's voice came out strangled. Celestine, please. Please what? Please spare him. Please show mercy? The girl's expression turned cold. You never showed me mercy, never acknowledged that living in your shadow was hell, that watching father mourn your mother while barely noticing mine broke something in me. She moved to unlock the cell door. So no mercy, just death, and the satisfaction of knowing I finally won. The door swung open. Celestine stepped inside, and Seraphina did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. Not words, just sound, raw, desperate, loud enough to echo through the dungeons. Celestine froze. What are you? Footsteps thundered down the corridor. Guards burst through the door, 6 of them, weapons drawn, and leading them was Beta Ronan Vale. The Northern Wolf's expression was carved from stone. His sword dripped blood. Behind him, Captain Lyra Thorne and Warden Thessaly stepped into view, also armed, also covered in blood. Ronan looked at Celestine. Step away from the king. The girl's face went white. How? You think we're idiots? Lyra said coldly. We knew it was a trap. We just needed to know who was setting it. She gestured to the guards. Arrest her. Celestine backed against the wall. You can't. We can. And we are. The guards grabbed Celestine and dragged her screaming from the cell. Ronan moved to Draven's chains, started breaking the locks. Your Majesty, are you injured? Draven's voice came out rough. No, just furious. The chains fell away. The king stood slowly, favoring the damaged leg, but his eyes burned with something colder than rage. Where's Morel? Dead, Thessaly said flatly. We killed her 20 minutes ago, along with most of her guard. The warden moved to unlock Seraphina's chains. The girl collapsed when the iron released, legs too numb to hold her weight. Draven caught her before she hit the ground, pulled her against his chest, and held on like she might disappear. I've got you, he whispered. Seraphina's entire body shook. Celestine? I know. She betrayed us. I know. His hand pressed against the back of her head, grounding her. But we're alive. That's what matters. Seraphina wanted to cry, wanted to collapse, wanted to let the weight of betrayal crush her. But Draven's arms held her together, so she breathed, in and out, until the world stopped spinning. They climbed out of the dungeons into chaos. House Valkaren's fortress burned. Fires consumed the eastern wing. Bodies littered the courtyards, blood stained white stone. Draven's wolves had torn through Morel's forces like death itself. No mercy, no hesitation, just brutal efficiency. This was what happened when you tried to kill a king who'd survived the impossible. You didn't get trials. You didn't get negotiations. You got slaughtered. Ronan led them to the main courtyard where the surviving members of Morel's conspiracy knelt in chains. 15 nobles, 20 guards, 3 servants, all waiting for judgment. Draven stood before them, blood on his clothes, fury in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard like a death sentence. You conspired against the crown. You attempted assassination. You betrayed the empire. He drew his sword. The penalty is death. One of the nobles, a middle-aged wolf with gray hair, looked up. Your Majesty, please. Draven cut his throat before he finished the sentence. The body collapsed. The king moved to the next one. Please, the woman begged. I have children. His blade fell. Again. 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 15 times. 15 corpses bleeding into expensive stone. When it was done, Draven stood surrounded by death and didn't look remotely affected. This is what survival looked like when you stripped away the pretense of civilization. When you stopped pretending that power came from laws or morality or anything except the willingness to do violence better than your enemies. Kings became monsters not because they enjoyed killing, but because the world demanded it. Because mercy was a luxury that got you murdered in your sleep. Because the only language traitors understood was blood. Draven Kaelor had learned that lesson 7 years ago when wolfsbane poison burned through his leg and his family died choking on wine meant to unite the territories. He'd spent every day since then proving he wouldn't make that mistake again, and anyone who thought his scars made him weak died learning otherwise. Seraphina watched him execute the conspirators and felt something shift inside her. Not horror, not disgust, understanding. This was the man she'd chosen. The king who ruled through fear because fear kept people alive, who killed without hesitation because hesitation got you killed, who loved her enough to walk into a trap and fight his way back out. She'd spent 19 years trying to be soft, invisible, harmless. But softness in this world meant death, and she was done dying. Draven turned to her. His eyes searched her face, looking for judgment, condemnation, disgust. She met his gaze without flinching. What about Celestine? She asked. The king's expression darkened. What about her? She's my stepsister. She tried to kill me. Tried to kill you. That makes her a traitor. I know. Seraphina's voice didn't shake. I want to be the one who executes her. Silence fell across the courtyard. Draven stared at her. Are you certain? Yes. Why? Because she's right. I've spent my whole life in her shadow, letting her exist while I disappeared. And I'm done with that. Her hands clenched. She chose this. She chose betrayal. She chose to use me as a weapon, so she gets to die knowing I'm the one who survived. The king studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Ronan, bring the girl. The beta dragged Celestine forward. The golden-haired girl looked terrified now, bruised from being arrested, dress torn, no more performance, no more charm, just a traitor facing execution. Seraphina, she whispered, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Seraphina interrupted. You meant every word, every lie, every betrayal. She took the sword Draven offered her. It was heavier than expected, cold, sharp enough to split bone. You wanted to know what it felt like to win, Seraphina said quietly, to finally step out of my shadow. She raised the blade. This is what it feels like. Celestine screamed. The sword fell. The scream cut off. Silence consumed the courtyard. Seraphina stood over her stepsister's corpse and felt nothing. No grief, no guilt, no regret. Just the cold certainty that survival meant doing things that couldn't be undone. That becoming strong enough to stand beside a king meant becoming someone who could kill without hesitation. That love in this world wasn't soft or gentle or safe. It was brutal, possessive, built on the shared understanding that you'd destroy anyone who tried to take what was yours. Draven moved beside her, took the sword from her shaking hands. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Seraphina looked up at him. Like I finally understand. Understand what? Why you are the way you are. She touched his scarred face. The world makes monsters of us all. The difference is whether we become monsters who protect what we love or monsters who destroy it. The king's expression softened. And which are you? I'm the monster who chose you. Draven kissed her. Right there in the courtyard, surrounded by corpses and burning buildings and wolves who'd followed him into hell. Not gently, not carefully, just honest. The kiss of two people who'd survived betrayal and came out harder on the other side. When they broke apart, Ronan cleared his throat. Your Majesty, we should return to Nightfang Crown before reinforcements arrive. Draven nodded. Burn the fortress, leave no evidence. No survivors except those loyal to the crown. It will be done. The wolves moved immediately. Within an hour, House Valkaren's beautiful white fortress was ashes. The The conspiracy that had threatened Draven's throne was destroyed. Lady Morel and Celestine Vale were corpses rotting in the ruins, and Seraphina stood beside the scarred Alpha, covered in blood that wasn't entirely metaphorical. They rode north through winter darkness. 3 days of hard travel. Minimal rest. The wolves around them silent. Watchful. Seraphina rode beside Draven the entire time. Neither of them spoke much, but their hands found each other constantly. Grounding. Anchoring. Proof they'd survived. On the third night, they stopped to make camp. Seraphina sat by the fire while Draven checked the perimeter with Ronan. Warden Thessaly approached and sat down beside her. The older woman studied her for a long moment, then spoke. "You've changed." Seraphina looked at her. "Is that a bad thing?" Thessaly's expression remained unreadable. "That depends. Are you stronger or just harder? Is there a difference?" "Yes. Strength survives, hardness breaks." The warden's eyes held hers. The king has spent 7 years hard, refusing to bend, refusing to trust. It kept him alive, but it made him brittle. She gestured toward where Draven stood talking with Ronan. "You softened him, made him care again. That's dangerous, but it's also what saved him." Seraphina frowned. "How?" "Because men who only fight for survival fight desperately. But men who fight for something they love fight absolutely. They don't just want to win, they need to." Thessaly stood. "Don't lose that softness. Don't become so hard that you forget why you're fighting." She walked away, leaving Seraphina staring into the fire, thinking about Celestine's corpse, about the 15 nobles Draven executed without hesitation, about the way killing her stepsister had felt necessary instead of tragic. Was she becoming hard? Or was she just finally strong enough to survive in a world that ate soft things alive? She didn't know, and that terrified her. Draven returned and sat beside her. "You all right?" Seraphina leaned against his shoulder. "I killed my stepsister today." "I know. Does it get easier?" The king was quiet for a long time. Then, "No. You just get better at living with it." His arm wrapped around her. "The first person I executed after taking the throne was a man who'd been loyal to my father for 20 years. He conspired with the wolves who poisoned my family, thought he could use me as a puppet king because I was young and crippled." Draven's voice roughened. "I killed him myself, drove my sword through his chest and watched him bleed out. And I felt nothing, just cold certainty that he had to die. That terrified me more than the execution itself." Seraphina looked up at him. "Why?" "Because feeling nothing meant I'd become exactly what everyone feared. A monster who killed without remorse." "And you don't want to be that?" "I don't have a choice. The Empire needs a monster, someone strong enough to keep the wolves in line, someone ruthless enough that enemies think twice before attacking." His eyes met hers. "But I don't want you to become that. You're the part of me that still remembers what it's like to care, to feel, to be human." Seraphina's throat tightened. "I killed Celestine without hesitating. What does that make me? Alive, and willing to do what it takes to stay that way. Is that enough? It has to be." They sat together in silence while the fire burned low. Around them, wolves kept watch, ready for the next attack, the next conspiracy, the next assassination attempt, because that's what ruling meant: constant vigilance, constant war, constant survival. And the only way to endure it was to find someone strong enough to survive beside you. They reached Nightfang Crown on the 4th day. The black fortress rose from frozen cliffs like a monument to everything they'd survived. The gates opened. Wolves lined the entrance, hundreds of them. Soldiers and servants and nobles who'd remained loyal. They knelt as Draven rode past, not out of love, out of fear and respect earned through 7 years of brutal survival. The king dismounted in the main courtyard, helped Seraphina down. Captain Lyra approached. "Your Majesty, the council awaits." "Let them wait." Draven pulled Seraphina toward the northern tower, toward his private chambers where they could finally breathe without watching for knives. Inside, he locked the door, then collapsed onto the bed like a puppet with cut strings. The exhaustion that he'd been holding back for days finally crashed over him. Seraphina knelt beside the bed. "Draven?" His eyes opened, tired, pained. I'm fine. Just the leg. Let me see. She rolled up his pant leg carefully. The scar tissue looked worse, inflamed, angry. Days of hard riding had aggravated the old damage. Seraphina fetched water and cloth, started cleaning the wounds. Draven hissed but didn't pull away. You need to rest, she said quietly. Can't. The council can wait. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. His hand caught hers. I don't know how to rest anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see threats, conspiracies, betrayals. Then don't close your eyes alone. She climbed onto the bed beside him, careful not to jostle the damaged leg. Draven pulled her close, buried his face against her hair. And for the first time in 7 years, the scarred alpha let himself be vulnerable. Not weak, just human. Just a man who'd survived hell and finally had someone who understood the cost. They stayed like that for hours, not sleeping, just existing together in the quiet. Eventually, Draven spoke. What Celestine said. About love making you weak. Seraphina lifted her head. What about it? Is she right? The king's eyes searched hers. Did loving you make me weak? Did it compromise my judgment? Did it put the empire at risk? Seraphina thought carefully before answering. Love didn't make you weak. It made you reckless. There's a difference. Explain. Weak means you can't protect what matters. Reckless means you'll risk everything to do it. She touched his face. You walked into a trap knowing it was a trap. That wasn't weakness. That was you deciding I was worth the risk. And was I? Yes. Even though we almost died? We didn't almost die. We survived, like we always do. Draven smiled. Barely. You sound like me. Good. Someone has to when you're too tired to be terrifying. The king laughed. Rough sound that turned into a cough. Seraphina handed him water. When did you last sleep? Before we left for the south? That was 6 days ago. I know. You're going to kill yourself. Probably. His eyes closed. But at least I'll die knowing I fought for something that mattered. Seraphina watched him drift toward unconsciousness and felt her heart clench. This was the reality of loving a king who ruled through survival. He'd work himself to death defending the empire. He'd sacrifice everything, including himself, to keep his wolves safe, and she'd either learn to live with that or lose him. The choice was hers. She chose to stay, chose to be the person who made sure he didn't destroy himself trying to protect everyone else, chose to be strong enough to carry him when he couldn't carry himself. Because that's what love meant in this brutal world. Not poetry, not romance, not soft words whispered in darkness. Just two people surviving together because alone they'd break. Draven fell asleep with his hand tangled in hers. Seraphina stayed awake, keeping watch, because someone had to. The council meeting happened the next morning. Draven looked better, rested. The exhaustion still carved into his face, but manageable. He sat at the head of the table with Seraphina beside him. The surviving council members gathered. Ronan, Lyra, Thessaly, Lord Aaron Blackwater, a dozen others who'd proven loyalty through blood. The king didn't waste time. House Valkaren is destroyed. Lady Morell is dead. Celestine Vale is dead. The Southern conspiracy is broken. He leaned forward. But that doesn't mean we're safe. Morell had allies we haven't identified yet, resources we haven't seized, operatives we haven't caught. So we keep hunting. Ronan spoke up. Your Majesty, the Southern territories are in chaos. Without Morell's control, then we take control. Send our wolves, secure the trade routes, install governors loyal to the crown, make it clear that defying Nightfang Crown has consequences. Another councilman frowned. That will take significant resources, and manpower we don't have. Then we take it from the territories that sided with Morell, seize their assets, conscript their soldiers, use their own strength against them. Draven's eyes swept the room. I'm done playing defensive, done reacting to threats. From now on, we eliminate them before they become problems. Warden Thessaly's voice cut through the tension. And what of the girl? Everyone looked at Seraphina. She felt the weight of their stares, felt them wondering if she was still the liability they'd worried about, or if she'd become something else. Draven's hand moved to cover hers on the table. Possessive, protective. The girl stays. As my queen. As my partner. Anyone who questions that can leave now. Silence. Lord Aaron cleared his throat. Your Majesty, no one is questioning her loyalty. She proved herself in the south. But what? But she's untrained, unprepared for the realities of ruling. If she's going to be queen, then we train her, Draven interrupted. Teach her strategy, combat, politics, everything she needs to survive in this world. He looked at Seraphina. If you're willing, she met his eyes. I am. Good. The king stood. Dismissed. All of you. I'll send orders by tonight. The council filed out, leaving Draven and Seraphina alone. The king turned to her. You understand what this means? Training to be queen? Training to survive. To rule. To make decisions that get people killed. His expression was serious. This isn't a game. This isn't romantic. This is war, constant, brutal, and if you're beside me, you're a target. I know. And you still want this? Seraphina thought about Celestine, about Morel, about 19 years of being invisible, followed by weeks of violence that changed everything. Yes, but on one condition. What? You stop trying to protect me from the ugly parts. If I'm your queen, I see everything. I know everything. No secrets. Draven's jaw tightened. Some things, no secrets, she repeated. We survive together or not at all. The king stared at her, then nodded slowly. Fine. No secrets. He moved closer. But understand something. The ugly parts are worse than you think. Worse than executions and conspiracies and battles. What could be worse? The choices. The impossible ones. Where every option leads to death and you have to pick who lives and who doesn't. His voice roughened. I've made those choices. I'll make them again. And eventually, you will too. Can you live with that? Seraphina didn't hesitate. Yes. How do you know? Because I already killed my stepsister, and I'd do it again. She held his gaze. I'm not the girl you met in your throne room anymore. That girl was scared and soft and trying to survive by being invisible. But I'm done being invisible. Done being soft. Her hand touched his scarred face. You asked me once if I was strong enough to stand beside you. The answer is yes. Not because I'm fearless, but because I'm willing to become whatever I need to be to survive in your world. Draven pulled her close, kissed her forehead. Then welcome to hell, Queen Seraphina. Hope you're ready for what comes next. She pressed against his chest. What does come next? War. Consolidation. Building an empire strong enough that no one tries this again. And us? We survive. Together. The king's arms tightened around her. No matter what it costs. The weeks that followed were brutal. Seraphina trained from dawn until exhaustion. Combat lessons with Captain Lyra. Strategy sessions with Ronan. Political education with Warden Thessaly. She learned to fight with daggers. To read battle maps. To identify weaknesses in alliance structures. She learned that ruling meant making decisions where people died regardless of what you chose. She learned that power wasn't about being loved, it was about being feared enough that enemies thought twice before attacking. And she learned that survival in this world meant becoming someone she barely recognized. But Draven was there through all of it, watching, teaching, pushing her harder when she wanted to quit. One night after a particularly brutal training session, Seraphina collapsed in their chambers. Bruised, bloodied, exhausted beyond words, Draven knelt beside her. You did well today. I failed every drill Lyra gave me. You survived them. That's what matters. He helped her sit up, handed her water. Survival isn't about perfection. It's about refusing to quit. Seraphina drank, then looked at him. Do you ever regret this? Us? Every day. Her heart clenched. Draven's hand touched her face. I regret that loving you puts you in danger. I regret that choosing you means you have to become harder. I regret that this world doesn't let us be soft, but I don't regret you. Never you. He kissed her. Gentle this time. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and the most terrifying, because now I have something to lose again. Seraphina leaned into him. Then we make sure no one can take it. The king smiled. Dark, dangerous, exactly. 2 months after destroying House Velcarin, Draven called another council meeting. This one was different, formal, ceremonial. The entire court gathered in the Great Hall. Nobles from across the empire, soldiers, servants, everyone who mattered. Draven stood before the obsidian throne wearing full royal dress, crown of iron, black armor polished to mirror shine. Beside him stood Seraphina, wearing crimson velvet, hair braided like a warrior queen, no longer the scared girl who'd arrived months ago. Someone harder, stronger, forged through fire. The king's voice carried across the hall. Today we formalize what everyone already knows. Seraphina Vale is no longer just my bride. She is my queen, my partner, my equal. He turned to her. And anyone who threatens her threatens me. The hall fell silent. Then Ronan stepped forward, knelt. Long live the queen. One by one, the wolves followed, until the entire court knelt before her. Seraphina stood frozen. This was real. She was queen of an empire built on violence and survival, bound to a king who'd survived the impossible and would destroy anyone who tried it again. And she'd chosen it, chosen him, chosen to become something strong enough to rule beside the scarred Alpha. Draven took her hand. Together? Seraphina squeezed back. Together. But as the court rose and cheers echoed through the hall, a messenger burst through the doors, blood-soaked, terrified. Your Majesty. Draven's expression went cold. What? The Northern Territories. They're under attack. An army, thousands of them, led by... The messenger's voice broke. Led by your brother. Silence consumed the hall. Seraphina's blood went cold. Draven's brother was dead, killed 7 years ago during the Wolfsbane massacre, unless he wasn't. The king's face went white, then hard as stone. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something breaking. My brother is dead. The messenger shook his head. He's alive, Your Majesty, and he's coming to take back his throne. The entire world tilted, because if Draven's brother lived, everything changed. The legitimate heir, the one who should have ruled instead of the crippled second son, the one whose survival meant Draven's entire reign was built on a lie. Seraphina looked at the king and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Because if his brother lived and took the throne, Seraphina was married to a usurper, and usurpers' wives didn't survive regime changes. They died. Publicly. Brutally. As examples. Draven's hand tightened around hers until bones ground together. His voice came out barely audible. Then we go to war. The war room emptied in seconds. Nobles scattered like rats fleeing fire. Servants disappeared into corridors. Even hardened soldiers looked shaken by the news that shouldn't be possible. Draven's brother was alive. The legitimate heir had returned. And everything Draven had built over 7 years was about to burn. Seraphina stood frozen beside the throne, while the king stared at the blood-soaked messenger like the man had just announced the end of the world. Because maybe he had. Draven's voice came out flat. Dead. How many soldiers? The messenger swallowed hard. Reports say 4,000, maybe more. They're moving south from the frozen wastes, burning everything in their path. Who leads them? Prince Kaelor, your brother. I know who he is, Draven snapped. What I need to know is how he's alive. The messenger shook his head. No one knows, Your Majesty. He just appeared 3 months ago. Started gathering wolves loyal to the old bloodline, promising to restore the true king. Seraphina watched Draven's face turn to stone. Watched the man who'd survived Wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 7 years of constant assassination attempts confront the one thing he'd never prepared for. The ghost of his past coming back to destroy him. Beta Ronan stepped forward. Your Majesty, we need to mobilize. Now. Draven didn't move. How long until they reach Nightfang Crown? 5 days. Maybe less if they force march. Then we have 5 days to prepare. The king finally looked at Seraphina. His storm-gray eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not fear for himself. Terror for her. Because if Kael took the throne, Draven became a usurper. A pretender. A man who'd stolen his brother's crown while everyone believed him dead. And Seraphina became the usurper's wife, which meant execution, public, brutal. designed to erase any legitimacy Draven's reign had built. The king's hand found hers, squeezed hard enough to hurt. "Come with me." He pulled her from the great hall toward his private chambers, locked the door behind them, then turned and grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me very carefully. When Kael arrives, you're going to run." Seraphina's stomach dropped. "What?" "I'm having Ronan prepare horses, supplies, gold, enough to get you across the eastern border into neutral territory." "No." "Yes. You leave tonight, before—" "I said no." Draven's grip tightened. "This isn't a negotiation." "You're right. It's not. Because I'm staying." The king's expression twisted. "You don't understand. If Kael wins, he won't. You don't know that. Neither do you." Seraphina pulled free of his grip. "I'm not running. I'm not abandoning you. We survived together or not at all. That's what you said. That was before—" "Before what? Before your dead brother came back to life? Before everything got complicated?" She stepped closer. "I killed my stepsister. I executed conspirators. I stood beside you while you purged the southern territories. I chose this world. I chose you. And I'm not running just because things got harder." Draven's jaw clenched. "You're being stubborn. I learned from the best. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing." Her hands grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "I know you're scared. I know you think protecting me means sending me away. But I'm more afraid of living without you than dying beside you. So we fight, together. And if Kael wants your throne, he goes through both of us." The king stared at her, something breaking and reforming behind his eyes. Then he kissed her, desperate, rough, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her before the world ended. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Draven's voice came out ragged. "If we lose, we won't. If we lose," he repeated, "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "You don't let them take you alive. You end it yourself. Quick. Clean." His hand moved to the dagger at her hip, the one he'd given her months ago. "Promise me." Seraphina's throat closed. She thought about what he was asking, thought about dying by her own hand instead of being executed as a spectacle. It was the most brutal form of love she'd ever encountered. Not promises of forever, not vows of protection, just the cold certainty that if survival became impossible, at least she'd control how she died. "I promise," she whispered. Draven pulled her against his chest, held on like she might disappear. And for just a moment, the scarred alpha let himself break. Not because he feared death, but because he'd finally found something worth living for, and the world was trying to take it away. Again. The council reconvened at midnight. Every loyal wolf gathered in the war room, maps spread across tables, battle plans sketched in charcoal, reports flooding in from northern scouts. The news got worse by the hour. Kael's army wasn't just soldiers. It was a movement. Wolves who'd lost faith in Draven's brutal rule. Nobles who resented the purges. Common folk who believed the rightful king had returned. 4,000 fighters, growing daily, against Nightfang Crown's 2,000 defenders. The math was simple, brutal, unforgiving. They were outnumbered 2-1. Lord Aaron Blackwater slammed his fist on the table. "We can't win a direct confrontation. We need to evacuate. Regroup in the southern territories." Draven's voice cut through the panic. "No. Your Majesty. We stand and fight here at Nightfang Crown, because if we run, we lose everything. The crown, the empire, our lives." He leaned over the map. "Kael is counting on us being afraid, counting on us retreating. We don't give him that satisfaction." Captain Lara spoke up. "What's the strategy?" Draven's finger traced the mountain passes leading to the fortress. The terrain. "We use it. Kael has numbers, but we have position. Nightfang Crown is built into the cliffs. Defensible. Brutal to assault. We force him to come to us. Bleed his army in the passes. Make every inch cost him soldiers." Ronan frowned. "That buys us time. But it doesn't win the war." "No, it buys us time to kill Kael." Silence fell. Warden Thessaly's eyes narrowed. "Assassination?" Draven nodded. "We can't beat his army, but we can cut off the head. Without Kael, his forces fracture. Wolves loyal to the old bloodline lose their symbol. The movement collapses. And how do you propose we kill a man surrounded by 4,000 soldiers? Lyra asked. I don't propose anything, Draven said quietly. I'm doing it myself. The room exploded. Your Majesty, you can't… That's suicide. If you die, the Empire falls. Draven's hand slammed the table. Silence. Everyone froze. The king's eyes swept the room. Cold. Absolute. Kael is my brother. My responsibility. My failure. 7 years ago, I watched him bleed out on marble floors, watched wolfsbane poison destroy him the same way it destroyed me. I saw him die. His voice roughened. Either I was wrong and he survived, or someone resurrected him, or this is an imposter using his face. Regardless, he dies by my hand, no one else's. Seraphina stepped forward. Then I'm coming with you. No. Yes. The king turned on her. This is different. It's not. You go into enemy territory alone, you die. You go with backup, you have a chance. She held his gaze. I'm your backup. Deal with it. Draven stared at her, then looked at Ronan. The beta's expression was grim. She's right, Your Majesty. You need someone watching your back, and she's proven she can handle herself, Lyra added. Warden Thessaly spoke quietly. The girl has earned her place. Let her fight. The king's jaw tightened. Then his shoulders dropped fractionally. Fine, but you follow my orders. No heroics? Seraphina nodded. No heroics. The meeting continued for hours. Strategy, logistics, contingencies. By the time it ended, dawn was breaking over frozen cliffs, and Kael's army was 3 days away. Draven spent the next 2 days preparing Nightfang Crown for siege, reinforcing gates, stockpiling weapons, positioning archers on battlements. Every corridor became a potential kill zone, every entrance a death trap. The fortress transformed into exactly what it was built to be, a monument to survival through violence. Seraphina trained with Captain Lyra until her hands bled and her muscles screamed. Combat drills, blade work, how to kill quickly and move faster, because going into enemy territory meant speed mattered more than strength, and hesitation meant death. On the second night, Draven found her in the training yard, alone, practicing knife throws in darkness. You should rest, he said. Can't. Too anxious. The king moved beside her, picked up a blade, threw it. Perfect center strike. Show off, Seraphina muttered. Draven almost smiled. 7 years of practice. You get good at killing when it's the only thing keeping you alive. He handed her another knife. They threw in silence for a while, steel thudding into wood, rhythmic, almost meditative. Finally, Draven spoke. Tell me about your mother. Seraphina froze mid-throw. What? Your mother. You never talk about her. There's not much to say. She died when I was 7. Sickness. Alpha Lucian barely acknowledged her existence even when she was alive. But you loved her. Yes. Tell me something you remember. Seraphina thought back. Fragments of memory worn smooth by time. She used to sing. Badly. Completely off-key. But she didn't care. She'd sing while cooking or cleaning or braiding my hair. Her throat tightened. She made everything feel safe. Like no matter how terrible the world was, I'd be okay because she was there. And then she died, and you weren't okay anymore. No, I wasn't. Draven pulled her close. That's why you're strong. Because you survived losing the person who made you feel safe, and you kept going anyway. Seraphina pressed her face against his chest. Why are you asking about her? Because if I die tomorrow, I want to know more about the woman I love than just her capacity for survival. His hand touched her hair. I want to know the soft parts, the human parts, the pieces that existed before the world made you hard. You're not going to die tomorrow, probably not. But in case I do, you won't. She pulled back to look at him. We're going to kill Kael. We're going to destroy his army, and we're going to survive because that's what we do. Draven studied her face in the moonlight, then kissed her. Gentle this time, like memorizing. When they broke apart, his voice was barely audible. I love you, in case I haven't said it enough. Seraphina smiled despite the fear clawing at her chest. You've said it twice. Then I love you, 3 times now. Good. Don't stop. I won't. They stood together in the frozen training yard while the Empire prepared for war around them. And for just a moment, they were simply two people holding each other against the darkness. Not a king and queen, just Draven and Seraphina. Broken, scarred, impossibly alive. On the third day, Kael's army arrived. Seraphina stood on the battlements beside Draven and watched 4,000 wolves flood the valley below Nightfang Crown. They moved like a dark tide. Organized, disciplined, battle standards flying, war drums thundering. This wasn't a rabble. It was a proper military force, and leading them, mounted on a black warhorse, was a man who looked exactly like Draven. Same height, same build, same dark hair touched with gray. But where Draven's face was scarred and brutal, Kael's remained unmarked. Perfect. The face of a prince who'd never been poisoned, never been crippled, never been broken. The face of everything Draven should have been if the world hadn't destroyed him. Seraphina watched the king's expression turn to stone. "That's him," Draven said quietly. "Are you certain?" "Yes." "How?" "Because I'd recognize my brother's face anywhere, even after 7 years dead." Kael rode forward, stopped 50 yards from the fortress gates. His voice carried across the valley. "Brother, I've returned to claim what's mine." Draven's hands clenched the battlement stone. "You're dead." Kael laughed. "Do I look dead?" "The Wolfsbane didn't kill me. It put me in a coma. When I woke, you'd already taken the throne. Stolen it, you mean?" "Survived it," Draven corrected. "While you were unconscious, I held this empire together. I fought off conspiracies. I executed traitors. I did what needed to be done." "You became a tyrant," Kael shouted. "A monster who rules through fear. I became what the empire needed. You became what you always were. A crippled second son jealous of his brother's birthright." The words hit like physical blows. Seraphina felt Draven flinch, felt the old wound tear open. Because Kael was right. Draven had been the second son, the one nobody expected to rule, the one who only got the throne because everyone thought Kael was dead. And now the rightful heir had returned to reclaim it. Kael's voice turned cold. "I'm giving you one chance, brother. Surrender, abdicate, and I'll let you live. Exile instead of execution." His eyes shifted to Seraphina. "The girl, too. I'll spare her. She's innocent in this." Draven's arm moved protectively in front of Seraphina. "She's my queen. She stays with me. Then you condemn her to death." "I condemn her to nothing. She makes her own choices." Kael shook his head. Always stubborn, always refusing to accept reality. He raised his hand. "You have until dawn tomorrow to surrender. After that, we attack. And I will take back my throne." He turned his horse and rode back toward his army. The valley fell silent except for wind screaming through mountain passes. Draven stood motionless, staring at the brother he'd watched die 7 years ago. Seraphina touched his arm gently. "Are you all right?" "No." His voice was hollow. "Everything I've done, every person I've killed, every brutal decision, all of it was to hold an empire I might not have any right to rule. You have every right. You survived. You earned it. But what if he's the better king? What if I am just a tyrant? What if—" "Stop." Seraphina grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "You're not a tyrant. You're a man who did what was necessary to keep people alive, to prevent civil war, to hold together an empire that would have collapsed without you. Kael might be the rightful heir by blood, but you're the rightful king by action. And if he wants your throne, he bleeds for it." Draven stared at her, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like desperation and determination. When they broke apart, his eyes had hardened again. "Tonight," he said. "We go tonight. Kill Kael before dawn. Before his army attacks." Seraphina nodded. "How?" "The same way I've survived everything else. Through violence and refusal to quit." He turned toward the war room. "Gather Ronan and Lyra. We plan the assassination." That night, 4 figures slipped out of Nightfang Crown through hidden tunnels carved into the cliffs. Draven, Seraphina, Ronan, Lyra, armed, silent, moving like ghosts through darkness. The plan was insane. Infiltrate Kael's camp, locate his command tent, kill him before his guards could respond, escape in the chaos. One chance. No backup, no room for error. Survival demanded it, because armies could be beaten. But legends couldn't, and Kael was becoming a legend. The rightful king returned from death to reclaim his throne. That story was more dangerous than 4,000 soldiers, so they killed the story by killing the man. They reached the enemy camp 2 hours before dawn. Fires burned throughout the valley. Soldiers sleeping in shifts, patrols moving in patterns. Draven studied the layout from a cliff overlooking the camp. Command 10 is center, 30 guards minimum. We go in fast. Kill Kael. Get out before they organize. Ronan frowned. That's suicide. Survival. There's a difference. Lyra checked her weapons. What's the signal? When I kill Kael, you'll know. Then we run. Simple, brutal, likely to get them all killed. But it was the only option. They moved down the cliff face, silent as death, reached the camp perimeter. Draven led them through gaps in the patrol routes, between tents, past sleeping soldiers. Every step calculated, every breath controlled. They reached the command tent. 2 guards stood outside, alert, armed. Draven gestured. Lyra and Ronan moved left. He and Seraphina went right. Simultaneous strikes. Throats cut before either guard could scream. Bodies dropped. They dragged them behind the tent. Then Draven drew his sword, looked at Seraphina. Ready? She nodded. He sliced through the tent canvas. They stepped inside. Kael sat at a campaign desk reviewing maps. Alone. He looked up. For a moment the brothers stared at each other. Then Kael smiled. I wondered when you'd try this. He stood, drew his own sword. Hello, brother. Come to murder me in my sleep? Draven's expression was carved from ice. Come to finish what the Wolfsbane started. Kael's smile turned sad. You really think killing me solves anything? My army doesn't disappear. They'll tear Nightfang Crown apart to avenge me. Maybe. But they'll do it without a leader, without a symbol. That's enough. Is it? Or are you just desperate? I'm always desperate. That's why I win. Draven lunged. Steel screamed against steel. The brothers fought like mirrors of each other. Same training, same technique, same brutal efficiency. But Draven fought with 7 years of survival carved into every strike. And Kael fought like a man who'd already died once and refused to do it again. Seraphina watched from the tent entrance, keeping guard, listening for approaching soldiers. Behind her, the Kaelor brothers destroyed each other. Blade against blade, strength against strength, will against will, neither giving ground. Kael drove Draven back against the desk. You were always the weaker one, the crippled second son who resented my existence. Draven's leg buckled, the old damage betraying him. Kael's sword swung toward his throat. But Draven dropped, rolled, came up slashing. His blade opened Kael's thigh, deep, arterial. Blood sprayed. Kael screamed, collapsed. Draven stood over him, sword raised, but didn't strike. The brothers stared at each other, both bleeding, both exhausted. Do it, Kael whispered. Kill me. Prove you're the monster everyone says you are. Draven's sword trembled, because this wasn't just an enemy. This was his brother, the person he'd mourned for 7 years, the ghost that haunted every decision he'd made since taking the throne. Killing Kael meant admitting he'd rather be king than have his family back. Meant choosing power over blood. Meant becoming exactly what everyone feared. Seraphina's voice cut through the silence. Draven, soldiers coming. We need to leave. Now! The king's eyes never left Kael's face. Then he drove the sword through his brother's heart. Kael's eyes went wide. Blood bubbled from his lips. I'm sorry, Draven whispered. The body went limp. Alarms screamed across the camp. Soldiers shouted. Boots thundered. Draven pulled his sword free, grabbed Seraphina's hand. Run! They burst from the tent into chaos. Enemy wolves everywhere, weapons drawn, closing in. Ronan and Lyra fought their way toward them, cutting through soldiers, creating a path. Move! Ronan shouted. They ran, through the camp, between tents, soldiers grabbing at them, steel flashing in firelight. Seraphina's blade found a throat, then another. Muscle memory from months of training taking over. Beside her, Draven fought like death itself, each strike precise, lethal, unstoppable. They reached the cliff face, started climbing. Arrows whistled past. One caught Lyra's shoulder. She kept climbing. Another hit Ronan's leg. He snarled but didn't slow. Draven pulled Seraphina up the rock face, hand over hand, ignoring the leg that screamed with every movement. They reached the top, looked back. The entire camp was awake now, thousands of soldiers mobilizing, realizing their leader was dead. But instead of falling apart, they roared with fury and turned toward Nightfang Crown. Kael's death hadn't ended the war. It had started it. They made it back to the fortress as the sun rose. Bloodied, exhausted, victorious. Kael was dead, but his army was coming, and now they were motivated by vengeance instead of restoration. Draven stood on the battlements watching 4,000 wolves march toward his fortress. Beside him, Seraphina's hand found his. "Did we make it worse?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "Was there another option?" "No." The king's jaw tightened. "We killed the legend. Now we face the consequences." Below them, the army reached the valley floor. War drums thundered, battle cries echoed off cliffs, and Nightfang Crown prepared for the siege that would decide everything. Draven looked at Seraphina. "One last time. Are you ready?" She met his eyes. "For this?" "No. But I'm doing it anyway." The king smiled, dark, dangerous. "That's my queen." He raised his sword, and the battle began. Arrows darkened the sky like locusts. Siege engines rolled forward. Ladders slammed against walls. The army of the dead prince crashed against Nightfang Crown like waves trying to break stone. And inside the fortress, 2,000 defenders fought for their lives. The battle raged for hours. Blood ran down fortress walls. Bodies piled at gates. Screams mixed with steel clashing and drums pounding. Seraphina fought beside Draven on the eastern ramparts. Her blade found enemy throats. Her boots crushed fingers trying to climb. Her entire world narrowed to survival measured in heartbeats. This was what war really looked like. Not glorious, not heroic, just blood and exhaustion and the desperate scramble to keep breathing one more second. Beside her, Draven commanded the defense with brutal efficiency, ordering archers, directing reinforcements, fighting personally when enemies breached the walls. The crippled leg didn't slow him. It made him more dangerous, because he'd learned to turn weakness into weapon, to use the limp to bait opponents into mistakes, to survive through adaptation instead of strength. That's what separated kings from corpses, the ability to keep fighting when your body screamed to stop. The sun set. The battle continued. Nightfang Crown held, barely. As darkness fell, both armies pulled back, exhausted, bloodied, preparing for tomorrow. Seraphina collapsed against the battlements. Her hands shook. Her armor was drenched in blood. Some hers, most not. Draven sat beside her, also covered in blood, also shaking. "We survived," he said. "Day one," she corrected. "How many more?" "Until one side breaks." His hand found hers. "Could be tomorrow, could be weeks." "Can we last weeks?" "We have to." They sat together watching fires burn in the valley below. Enemy camp, funeral pyres, the aftermath of violence. Tomorrow they'd fight again, and the day after, and the day after that, until Nightfang Crown fell or the army broke. Seraphina looked at the man beside her, the scarred alpha who'd survived wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 7 years of constant war. The man she'd chosen despite knowing it meant drowning in blood. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Killing Kael?" Draven's eyes remained fixed on the fires. "Every second. But I'd do it again." "Why?" "Because the Empire doesn't need the rightful king. It needs the one who survives." He looked at her. "And I'm still here." Seraphina leaned against his shoulder. "Then so am I." They stayed there until exhaustion dragged them toward unconsciousness. But before sleep claimed him, Draven whispered one last thing. "If we lose tomorrow—" "We won't," Seraphina interrupted. "If we lose," he continued, "I need you to know something." "What?" "Loving you was the only thing I did right. The only choice I don't regret." His arms tightened around her. "So thank you. For choosing a broken king. For standing beside a monster. For making survival feel like more than just refusing to die." Seraphina's throat closed. Her eyes burned. But she didn't cry, because crying was a luxury they couldn't afford. "I love you too," she whispered back, monster and all. They fell asleep holding each other on blood-stained battlements while the Empire burned around them. And in the valley below, the army of the dead prince prepared for the assault that would end everything. Dawn came too fast. War drums thundered. The siege engines rolled forward, and 4,000 wolves charged Nightfang Crown with vengeance singing in their blood. This was the final push, the battle that decided who ruled and who died. Draven stood at the main gate, sword drawn. Crown of iron still on his head. Beside him, Seraphina raised her blade. Around them, 2,000 loyal wolves prepared to sell their lives dearly. The king's voice carried across the battlements. Today we prove that survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being the last one standing. He raised his sword. For Nightfang Crown, for the Empire, for everyone who refused to quit. The defenders roared, and the gates shattered. Enemy wolves flooded through. Steel crashed against steel, blood-painted stone. And in the center of the chaos, King Draven Kaelor fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because he'd already lost everything that mattered except the woman fighting beside him. And he'd burned the world before he let anyone take her too. The battle reached its peak. Bodies everywhere, smoke choking the air, screams that would haunt survivors forever. Seraphina fought until her arms went numb, until blood made her grip slippery, until exhaustion turned everything into slow-motion nightmare. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because stopping meant dying, and she'd promised Draven they'd survive together. Beside her, the king cut through enemies with mechanical precision. His face was a mask of blood and determination. This was the scarred alpha at his most dangerous. Not when he was whole, but when he was broken and fighting anyway. The tide turned. Slowly, agonizingly. The defenders held, pushed back, began winning. Enemy forces started breaking, retreating, running, and suddenly, impossibly, Nightfang Crown stood, victorious. The army of the dead prince shattered against the fortress walls and fled, leaving behind thousands of corpses, and a king who'd proven once again that survival was the only crown that mattered. Draven stood in the ruins of his fortress, blood-soaked, exhausted, but alive. Beside him, Seraphina collapsed. He caught her before she hit the ground. "You did it," she whispered. "We won." The king looked around at the carnage, at the bodies, at the price of victory. "Did we?" he asked quietly, because winning felt an awful lot like losing when you counted the cost. But they were alive, and in this brutal world, that was the only victory that counted. Draven carried Seraphina toward the fortress interior, past celebrating soldiers, past medics treating wounded, past the reality of what survival demanded. And as he walked, carrying the woman who'd stood beside him through hell, something shifted in his expression. Not softness, not peace, just the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who'd fought one war too many, but who would fight 1,000 more if it meant keeping her safe. Because that's what love meant in the empire of the scarred alpha. Not romance, not poetry, just two people refusing to die, together, no matter what it cost. The fortress smelled like death and smoke. Seraphina woke in Draven's chambers with no memory of how she got there. Her body screamed. Every muscle felt torn. Her hands were wrapped in bandages. Blood had dried in her hair. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. "Easy," a voice said. Warden Thessaly emerged from the shadows. The older woman looked exhausted, bloodied, but alive. "How long was I unconscious?" Seraphina asked. 12 hours. You pushed yourself past collapse. The king carried you here himself. Where is he? Thessaly's expression darkened. Where he always is. Working, trying to hold together what's left. Seraphina forced herself upright despite the pain. I need to see him. You need to rest. I need to see him, she repeated. The warden studied her, then nodded. He's in the throne room, dealing with the aftermath. Seraphina dressed slowly. Her armor was ruined. Someone had left clean clothes. Simple, functional. She put them on with shaking hands, then walked through corridors that looked like a war zone. Bodies were still being cleared. Blood stained every surface. Sections of wall had collapsed. The beautiful obsidian fortress had become a tomb, but it still stood, and that mattered. She reached the throne room and stopped. The space was packed with wounded soldiers. Medics moved between them. The smell of blood and infection was overwhelming. At the far end, sitting on the obsidian throne looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight, was King Draven Kaelor. He was listening to reports, making decisions, coordinating relief efforts, still ruling, still fighting, even when his body clearly wanted to collapse. Seraphina moved through the wounded until she reached the dais. Draven looked up. His storm-gray eyes widened. "You should be resting. So should you." The king's expression was carved from exhaustion. "Can't. Too much to do." Beta Ronin stepped forward. "Your Majesty, you've been awake for 36 hours. I need the casualty reports," Draven interrupted. "How many did we lose?" Ronin's jaw tightened. 800 dead, another 400 wounded badly enough they won't fight again. The words hit like physical blows. 800 loyal wolves, dead defending a king whose legitimacy had been questioned by his own brother. 800 families who'd never see their loved ones again. The price of survival kept climbing. Draven's hands clenched the throne arms. And the enemy? Scattered. Most fled north. We're tracking down remnants, but they're disorganized. Without Kael to lead them, the movement collapsed. Good. The king stood slowly, favoring the damaged leg worse than ever. Send word across the empire. The usurper prince is dead. The rightful king remains. Any territory that supported Kael's rebellion will be dealt with. Ronin nodded. And those who remained loyal? Reward them. Land, titles, gold, whatever they need. They earned it. It will be done. The beta left. Draven swayed slightly, caught himself on the throne. Seraphina moved immediately, grabbed his arm. "You're done. Bed. Now." "I can't." "You can. The Empire won't collapse if you sleep for 6 hours." She pulled him toward the exit. For once, the scarred Alpha didn't fight her. They made it to his chambers before his legs gave out completely. Seraphina caught him, barely, helped him to the bed. Draven collapsed onto the mattress like a man who'd been holding up the world and finally let go. His eyes closed, then opened again. "Kael. He's dead. You killed him. I know, but..." His voice broke. "He was my brother, the person I mourned for 7 years, and I drove a sword through his heart without hesitating. Because you had to. Does that make it easier? No, but it makes it necessary." Seraphina sat beside him, took his scarred hand in hers. "You've spent 7 years making impossible choices, killing people who needed to die, becoming the monster the Empire demanded. And you're tired. I see it. Everyone sees it." The king's eyes met hers. "Are you saying I should abdicate?" "I'm saying you're human, and humans break when they carry too much for too long." His jaw tightened. "I can't break. The Empire will survive. It always does. With you or without you." She touched his face. "But I need you to survive. Not as a king, as a man, as the person I love who's been fighting alone for too long." Draven stared at her, something crumbling behind his eyes. "I don't know how to stop fighting." "Then don't stop. Just let me fight beside you instead of watching you destroy yourself." The king pulled her down beside him, held on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. And for the first time since taking the throne 7 years ago, Draven Kaelor let himself admit something he'd spent every day denying. He was tired, bone deep, soul-crushing, exhausted beyond anything physical, tired of violence, tired of death, tired of making choices where everyone lost something. But he couldn't quit, because quitting meant abandoning everyone who'd bled for him, everyone who'd trusted him to keep them safe, everyone who believed the scarred Alpha was strong enough to survive anything. That's the brutal truth about being a leader in a world built on violence. You don't get to stop. You don't get to rest. You carry the weight until it crushes you or you become strong enough to bear it. And Draven had been bearing it alone, until Seraphina. "You're not alone anymore," she whispered against his chest. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The king's arms tightened around her, and he finally slept. 3 days passed before the full accounting of the battle was complete. 812 dead, 437 permanently wounded, another 600 with injuries that would heal but left scars. Nearly half of Nightfang Crown's defenders were casualties. The enemy losses were worse. 3,000 dead or captured. The remaining 1,000 scattered across the northern territories. a decisive victory by any measure, but it felt like defeat. Draven stood in the courtyard where funeral pyres burned day and night, watching loyal wolves become ash. Each one was a failure. Each death was on his hands, because he'd chosen to fight instead of surrender, chosen to kill Kyle instead of negotiate, chosen survival over peace. And 800 families paid the price. Seraphina found him there on the third night, standing alone, watching flames consume the dead. She didn't speak, just stood beside him. After a long silence, Draven finally broke. "I'm responsible for this. All of it. You're responsible for keeping the Empire together. The deaths are on Kyle, on Morel, on everyone who chose violence. I chose violence too. Because you had no other option. There's always another option. I just didn't take it." His voice was hollow. Maybe Kyle was right. Maybe I am just a tyrant who murdered his way to a throne I had no right to claim. Seraphina grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. "You survived. You held this empire together through 7 years of constant war. You executed traitors who would have destroyed everything. You made brutal choices because the alternative was collapse. That doesn't make you a tyrant. It makes you a king who understands that survival isn't clean. And these deaths?" She gestured to the pyres. "They're tragic. They're terrible. But they're not your fault. These wolves died defending something they believed in. Defending you. Defending the Empire. That's honor, not failure." Draven's eyes searched hers. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. I'm just as lost as you are. But we're lost together, and that's better than being lost alone." The king pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and for the first time since the battle ended, he let himself grieve. Not for Kyle, not for the throne, not for the Empire. For the person he'd been before wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 7 years of violence transformed him into something harder than the world that tried to break him. That version of Draven Kaelor died 7 years ago. But maybe, with Seraphina beside him, he could become something new. Not the scarred alpha who ruled through fear, just a man trying to build something better on the ashes of what he'd destroyed. The council meeting 2 weeks later was different, smaller, quieter. The wolves who survived looked haunted, battle-scarred, changed. Draven sat at the head of the table, Seraphina beside him. No longer hidden, no longer just the king's bride, his equal, his partner, his queen. The king's voice was steady. "The northern territories are secure. Kyle's remaining forces have surrendered or fled beyond our borders. The threat is over." Lord Aaron Blackwater nodded. "And the southern territories?" "Stable. With Morel dead and House Valkaren destroyed, the power vacuum is filling with wolves loyal to the crown." "What about succession?" another councilman asked. "If something happens to you..." Draven's hand moved to cover Seraphina's. "The queen will rule. Anyone who questions that will answer to me." Silence fell. This was unprecedented. A bastard girl with no noble blood becoming sole ruler of an empire built on wolf bloodlines. But nobody argued, because they'd seen Seraphina fight, seen her stand beside Draven through hell, seen her execute traitors without hesitation. She'd earned her place through blood and survival, just like the king. Warden Thessaly spoke quietly. "Your Majesty, the Empire needs stability, needs to heal. What are your plans?" Draven leaned back. "For too long, this empire has been held together through fear and violence. That worked, but it's not sustainable." He looked around the table. "We start rebuilding, invest in the territories instead of just taxing them, support local governance instead of crushing it. Give wolves a reason to be loyal beyond terror." "That's a significant change in philosophy," Ronan observed. "I know, but ruling through fear only works until someone more frightening comes along. I want to build something that survives because people choose it, not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." "And if they rebel anyway?" Lyra asked. Draven's expression hardened. "Then we remind them why fear worked in the first place. But we don't start with violence, we end with it if necessary." The council absorbed that. This was a different king than the one who'd executed 15 conspirators without hesitation months ago. Still dangerous, still willing to kill, but trying something other than just survival through brutality. The meeting continued for hours. Plans, strategies, rebuilding efforts. When it ended, Seraphina and Draven walked through the fortress together. The damage was being repaired. Slowly. Stone by stone. Life returning to halls that had been tombs. You meant what you said in there, Seraphina observed. About changing how you rule. Draven nodded. I'm tired of only knowing how to break things. I want to try building instead. Think it'll work? Probably not, but I have to try. He stopped walking, turned to face her. You changed me. Made me believe that strength isn't just about surviving. It's about what you do with the survival once you've earned it. I didn't do anything. You did this yourself. No. You showed me there was another option. That loving someone doesn't make you weak. It makes you fight harder, smarter. His hand cupped her face. I was dying before you arrived. Not physically, but inside. Becoming exactly the monster everyone feared. And I didn't care because caring meant vulnerability. But you made me care again. Made me remember what I was fighting for beyond just not losing. Seraphina's eyes burned. What are you fighting for now? You. An empire where people like you don't have to be invisible to survive. A world where strength doesn't only mean violence. He kissed her forehead. I'll probably fail. Probably die trying. But at least I'll die fighting for something that matters instead of just fighting to keep breathing. You're not going to die, Seraphina said fiercely. I won't let you. Draven smiled. Barely. Then I guess I better survive. Can't disappoint my queen. They continued walking. Outside, spring was beginning to touch the frozen territories. Snow melting. Green things pushing through dead ground. Life reasserting itself despite the violence. The empire would heal, slowly, imperfectly, with scars that never fully faded. But it would survive. Because survival was what Nocturne did best. 6 months after the battle, Seraphina stood on the battlements watching the ocean crash against cliffs. The fortress had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The dead were honored, the wounded cared for. Life had returned to something resembling normal, but normal meant something different now. Draven's reforms were working, cautiously. The territories were stabilizing. Wolves who'd lived in fear were beginning to hope. It wasn't perfect. Violence still erupted, conspiracies still formed, but they were manageable, survivable. The Empire was learning that strength could be built on something other than terror. Footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Draven moved beside her, also watching the ocean. His limp was worse. The battle had aggravated old damage that would never fully heal, but he'd stopped trying to hide it, stopped pretending the scars didn't exist. They were part of him now. Proof of survival, not shame. I was thinking, he said quietly. Dangerous habit. The king smiled slightly. We should get married, officially. A real ceremony, not just the political arrangement that brought you north. Seraphina looked at him. Why? Because I want the Empire to see what you mean to me. I want everyone to know that the Scarred Alpha chose you, not out of duty, not out of strategy, but because loving you made me stronger. And because, he continued, I want to promise you something real. Not just survival, but partnership. Building something together instead of just fighting to keep it. His eyes met hers. What do you say? Seraphina thought about the girl who'd arrived at Nightfang Crown terrified and invisible. About everything that had happened since. About becoming someone she barely recognized. Someone harder, scarred, capable of violence she'd never imagined. But also someone loved. Protected, valued for more than just survival. Yes, she said, but on one condition. What? No more secrets, no more carrying everything alone. We're partners. That means sharing the weight. Draven pulled her close. Deal. They stood together watching the empire they'd bled for stretch out beneath them. Imperfect, brutal, beautiful in the way scars are beautiful. Proof that you survived what should have killed you. The wedding happened a month later. Not elaborate. Not political theater. Just a ceremony in the great hall with loyal wolves bearing witness. Seraphina wore crimson velvet. Draven wore black armor. Both of them scarred. Both of them tired. Both of them refusing to quit. When Beta Ronin asked if they promised to stand together through whatever came next, they answered simultaneously. We do. Not because it was romantic, not because it was easy, but because they'd already survived hell together and knew exactly what that promise cost. The celebration afterward was subdued. The Empire was still healing, but there was laughter, hope, the beginning of something that felt like peace. Draven and Seraphina slipped away early, walked to the northern tower where they could watch stars appear over frozen wilderness. "Do you regret it?" the king asked quietly. "Choosing me. This life. The violence." Seraphina thought carefully before answering. "I regret the people who died. I regret the person I had to become to survive. I regret that loving you meant learning to kill." She took his hand. "But I don't regret you. I don't regret surviving. I don't regret becoming strong enough to stand beside the most terrifying man alive and not flinch." Draven's expression softened. "I'm not that terrifying. You executed your own brother without hesitation. You purged entire territories. You built an empire on fear and violence." "Yes, I did. And I chose you anyway. Because beneath the monster I saw the man. The one who's been fighting alone for too long. The one who needed someone to remind him why survival matters." She touched his scarred face. "You're terrifying, but you're mine, and I wouldn't change that for anything." The king kissed her. Not desperately, not hungrily, just honestly. The kiss of two people who'd survived impossible things and chose each other on the other side. When they broke apart, Draven rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not running. For standing beside me. For making me believe that broken things can still be valuable. You're not broken. You're scarred. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Broken things can't function. Scarred things survived something terrible and kept going anyway." Draven smiled. "Then we're both scarred." "Yes, but we're scarred together, and that makes us stronger." They stood in silence while stars filled the sky and the Empire slept below them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new impossible choices. But tonight, King Draven Kaelor and Queen Seraphina stood together at the edge of their kingdom and allowed themselves something they'd earned through blood and survival. Peace. Not permanent, not perfect. Just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because that's what love meant in the Empire of the Scarred Alpha. Not romance, not poetry, not soft promises whispered in darkness. Just two people refusing to break, refusing to quit, refusing to die. Together. No matter what it cost. Years passed. The Empire changed, slowly. Territories that had lived in fear began to thrive. Wolves who'd only known violence learned to build. It wasn't easy. Rebellions still happened. Conspiracies still formed. The Scarred Alpha still executed traitors who threatened what he'd built. But the violence was controlled now. Purposeful. Not the desperate flailing of a man trying to survive. Draven aged. The scars multiplied. The limp worsened. His hair went completely gray before he turned 40. But he ruled. Firmly. Sometimes brutally. But with purpose beyond just keeping the crown. Beside him, Seraphina became the queen. The Empire didn't know it needed. She listened where Draven commanded. She showed mercy where he showed steel. She reminded the Empire that strength could be gentle without being weak. Together, they built something that lasted. Not through fear alone, not through love alone, but through the brutal understanding that survival demanded both. On Draven's 50th birthday, Seraphina found him in the training yard. He still trained, every morning despite the leg that barely worked anymore, despite exhaustion, despite age, because stopping meant giving up. And the Scarred Alpha didn't know how to quit. She watched him move through sword forms, slower than before, more careful, but still deadly. When he finished, she approached, handed him water. "You're going to train yourself into an early grave," she observed. Draven drank, smiled slightly. Rather die fighting than rot in comfort. "There are other options." "Name one." "Living. Actually living, not just surviving." The king's expression shifted. "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn. We have time." "Do we?" "I'm 50. The leg is failing. The body is breaking down. How much time do I really have?" Seraphina took his hand, traced the scars. "As much as you choose to take. You survived wolfsbane poison. Family massacre. 7 years of constant war. A siege that should have killed you. Her eyes met his. You don't get to quit now. Not when we've finally built something worth keeping. Draven pulled her close. What if I'm tired of fighting? Then rest. I'll watch your back. For how long? As long as you need. The king buried his face against her hair, held on, and allowed himself to admit something he'd spent decades denying. He was tired. Not of ruling, not of the empire, just tired of carrying the weight alone. But he wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. On Draven's 60th birthday, the empire celebrated. Not because the scarred alpha was beloved. He wasn't. People feared him, respected him, obeyed him. But they also understood that he'd held together an empire that would have collapsed without him, that survival sometimes demanded monsters, and that the monster who protected you was better than the one trying to kill you. The celebration was massive. Wolves from every territory gathered at Nightfang Crown. Feasts, tournaments, ceremonies. Draven endured it all with tired patience, but when night fell, he and Seraphina escaped to the northern tower, their refuge, the place where they could be human instead of symbols. 60 years, Draven said quietly. I've been alive 60 years and fought for 53 of them. Do you regret it? The king considered. No, but I wonder what I would have become if the world had been kinder. Seraphina leaned against him. You would have been soft, gentle, completely unprepared for reality. And that's bad? Not bad, just different. The man I love exists because of what you survived. Take away the scars and you take away the person. Even the monster parts? Especially those. Because the monster parts are what kept you alive long enough to find the human parts again. Draven smiled. When did you become so wise? When I stopped being afraid and started surviving instead. They sat together watching the empire sleep. After a long silence, Draven spoke again. I'm dying. Seraphina's breath caught. What? Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. The body is failing. The healers confirm it. How long? A year, maybe 2. The wolfsbane damage is finally catching up. His hand squeezed hers. I wanted you to know. Before it becomes obvious, before the empire starts circling like wolves scenting weakness. Seraphina's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Then we make the transition smooth. We prepare. We make sure the empire survives you. Draven looked at her. You'll rule after I'm gone. Yes. Can you handle it? I've been ruling beside you for 30 years. I can handle it alone if I have to. The king touched her face. You shouldn't have to be alone. I won't be. I'll have the council. The loyal wolves, your legacy. Her voice broke slightly, and memories of the most terrifying, brutal, extraordinary man I've ever known. Draven pulled her into his arms, held on. I love you. In case I haven't said it enough, you've said it 1,000 times. Say it again anyway. I love you. For standing beside a broken king, for becoming strong enough to rule an empire, for making survival feel like more than just refusing to die. Seraphina pressed her face against his chest. I love you too. Monster and man, scars and all. They stayed there until dawn, not speaking, just existing together, knowing that time was running out, but refusing to waste what remained on fear or regret. Just love. Brutal, honest, earned through blood and survival. The kind of love that only exists between people who've been to hell together and chose each other on the other side. Draven Kaelor died on a winter morning 18 months later. Not in battle, not gloriously, just quietly in his sleep with Seraphina beside him. The scarred alpha, who'd survived wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 50 years of constant war, finally stopped fighting, and the empire mourned, not because they loved him, but because they understood what he'd sacrificed to keep them safe. The funeral was massive. Wolves from every territory came to pay respects. Enemy and ally alike acknowledging that whatever else Draven had been, he'd been a king who understood survival. Seraphina stood beside the pyre wearing black, dry-eyed, steady. She'd cried privately, grieved in the darkness of their chambers, screamed her rage and loss where no one could see. But in public, she stood strong, because that's what queens did. They carried the weight even when it crushed them. Beta Ronan approached after the ceremony. Your Majesty, the council awaits. Let them wait. We need to discuss succession. Transition. The Empire needs stability. Seraphina looked at him. The Empire will have stability. I'm not my husband. I don't rule through fear, but I learned from him. Her eyes hardened. Anyone who thinks a queen is weaker than a king will learn otherwise. Quickly. Ronan nodded. Then long live Queen Seraphina. Around them, the assembled wolves echoed the sentiment. Long live the queen. Seraphina stood alone on the battlements that night. The same place she'd stood with Draven countless times, watching the ocean, watching the Empire, watching life continue despite violence and death and loss. She thought about the girl who'd arrived at Nightfang Crown 30 years ago, terrified, invisible, carrying lies like armor. That girl was gone, burned away by years of survival, replaced by someone harder, scarred, capable of ruling an empire built on blood. But somewhere beneath the scars, pieces of that girl remained. The part that believed kindness mattered, that people deserved better than just survival, that strength could build instead of just destroy. Draven had taught her to survive. Now she'd teach the Empire to live. It wouldn't be easy. Wolves would challenge her. Conspiracies would form. Violence would erupt. But she'd faced worse. She'd stood beside the scarred Alpha through hell, learned from the most brutal king alive, became someone strong enough to rule alone. And she'd do it in a way that honored his memory while building something new, not through fear alone, through the understanding that true strength meant knowing when to fight and when to build, when to kill and when to spare, when to be the monster and when to be human. Draven had spent his life being the monster the Empire needed. Seraphina would spend hers proving that empires could be built on something more. Not because his way was wrong, but because she'd learned from both the monster and the man. And that made her stronger than either alone. Below her, Nightfang Crown slept. The black fortress that had survived wolfsbane poison and family massacre and 50 years of war. The monument to survival through violence. And standing on its highest tower, watching stars fill the sky, Queen Seraphina made a promise to the man she loved and the empire they'd bled for. She would survive. She would rule. She would build something worthy of the sacrifices that made it possible. Not perfectly, not without cost, but honestly, brutally, with the same refusal to quit that had kept Draven alive long enough to find her, because that's what love meant in the empire of the scarred Alpha. Not romance, not poetry, not soft endings wrapped in sentiment, just the bone-deep certainty that survival was earned, that strength was built through scars, that the greatest love was choosing someone despite knowing exactly what that choice would cost. And as dawn broke over the frozen empire, Queen Seraphina turned from the battlements and walked back into the fortress, ready to face whatever came next, alone but not lonely, scarred but not broken, surviving not just for herself, but for everyone who'd fought beside her, for the empire that needed her, and for the memory of a king who'd taught her that the strongest thing you can do isn't refusing to break. It's breaking and getting back up anyway, together or alone, until the very end.